She was wearing the wrong dress in the right room, and everyone made sure she knew it. One night, one gala, one act of cruelty that was supposed to destroy her. But nobody counted on him watching. Adrian Sterling had stood in rooms full of powerful people his entire life, and he had never once been moved by any of them. Until the night he watched a woman get publicly humiliated by her own sister, and instead of crumbling, she lifted her chin and refused to break. That was the night everything changed. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. Hit like and stay until the end. You won't regret it. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks before the gala, slipped beneath the door of apartment 4B like it was nothing, like it wasn't the most expensive piece of paper Emily Carter had ever held in her hands. She'd turned it over twice, reading the embossed gold lettering. The Hargrove Foundation Annual Charity Gala. Black tie. The Whitmore Grand Hotel. Saturday, October 14th. How did we even get this? She'd asked. Her sister Vanessa had snatched it back before Emily could finish reading. Through my connections, she'd said, with that particular emphasis she always gave the word my, like everything of value in the world belonged to her by right of wanting it badly enough. Emily hadn't pushed. She'd learned a long time ago not to push with Vanessa. 3 weeks later, she was standing in her childhood bedroom, the one she still shared with Vanessa whenever she came home to visit their mother, staring at the dress her sister had laid out across the bed. It was lavender. Not a soft, pretty lavender, a faded, institutional lavender, the color of old hospital curtains. The silhouette was boxy in all the wrong places, with a hemline that sat awkwardly between the knee and the ankle in a way that was neither elegant nor casual, just uncertain, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Emily recognized it immediately. It was their mother's dress from 1987. She'd found it in a plastic storage bin in the garage when she was 12 years old and thought it looked like something a television news anchor might have worn during a broadcast about the fall of the Berlin Wall. "Vanessa," she said carefully, "this is Mom's old dress." "I know what it is." Vanessa was standing by the window doing something on her phone, not looking up. She was wearing a floor-length emerald gown that she'd had tailored specifically for tonight. It fit her perfectly. Everything about her looked expensive and deliberate. "Your dress had a stain on it." "My dress?" Emily stopped. She thought about the navy blue wrap dress she'd purchased specifically for this event, the one she'd spent 2 weeks' worth of grocery money on because she knew a charity gala at the Whitmore wasn't the kind of place where you showed up in whatever. "My dress doesn't have a stain on it." "I saw a stain." "Where?" "Near the hem." Vanessa finally looked up from her phone, and there was something in her expression that Emily had spent 30 years learning to read and still couldn't fully name. It wasn't quite meanness. It was something more complicated than that, something that looked, around the edges, almost like satisfaction. "You don't want to show up to an event like this with a stain on your dress, Emily. People notice these things." Emily looked at the lavender dress on the bed. She thought about saying, "People are also going to notice this." She thought about saying, "I know what you're doing, Vanessa, and I'm not going to let you." Instead, she picked up the dress and went into the bathroom to change, because it was easier than the fight that would follow, and because their mother was downstairs making tea and Emily didn't want her to hear them arguing, and because some part of her, the part that had been quietly absorbing Vanessa's small cruelties for 3 decades, had already accepted that this was just how the evening was going to begin. She told herself it would be fine. She was wrong. The Whitmore Grand Hotel sat in the center of the city like it had always been there and always would be. The kind of building that made you feel, walking toward it, that you should stand up a little straighter and speak a little more quietly. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung in the lobby. The marble floors reflected everything. The women in their gowns, the men in their suits, the soft gold light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A string quartet played somewhere near the entrance to the main ballroom, something classical that Emily couldn't name but recognized as the kind of music that was meant to signal that you had arrived somewhere important. She felt none of it. What she felt, walking through those lobby doors behind her sister, was the particular discomfort of wearing the wrong thing in the right place. The prickling awareness of her own outline, the way the lavender fabric sat wrong across her shoulders, the hemline grazing her calves in a way that made her feel not modest but simply awkward, like a woman from a different decade who had wandered into the wrong building. People looked. She saw them look. A quick glance down, then up, then away. The polite dismissal of someone who has been evaluated and categorized in under 3 seconds. Vanessa moved through the room like she'd been born for it. And maybe she had, in a way. Vanessa had spent her whole life rehearsing for exactly this kind of entrance, studying the gestures and the cadences and the careful art of seeming comfortable in rooms that should make you nervous. "There's the bar," she said, touching Emily's arm briefly. "Why don't you get us drinks?" It wasn't a question. Emily went to the bar. What? She ordered sparkling water for herself and a glass of Sauvignon Blanc she couldn't afford for her sister, and she stood at the edge of the room and tried to figure out what she was doing here. The Hargrove Foundation raised money for children's literacy programs. That was something Emily actually cared about. She was a kindergarten teacher, had been for 6 years now, and she knew exactly what it looked like when a 5-year-old encountered a book for the first time and something clicked into place behind their eyes. It was one of the best things she'd ever seen, that click. She'd have paid real money to see more of it. But standing here in her mother's 1987 dress with a glass of wine she was about to deliver to her sister, she felt approximately zero connection to the cause on the banner above the ballroom entrance. She felt like furniture, decorative and unnecessary. Emily. Vanessa appeared at her elbow with a group of people in tow, 3 women, 2 men, all of them wearing the particular expression of people who are perpetually auditioning for a version of their lives that is slightly more glamorous than the current one. "These are the chambers, and this is Richard Holloway, he's on the foundation board, and this—" Vanessa paused for effect, her voice dropping into something that was almost a purr. "Is my sister." The word landed the way Vanessa always made it land when she used it in rooms like this, like a small apology. "This is my sister." As in, I know, here she is. "Lovely to meet you," said one of the women, whose name Emily didn't catch. She was looking at the dress in a way that she clearly thought was subtle and wasn't. "Emily teaches kindergarten," Vanessa said. Another thing she'd learned to use like a weapon. Not a lie, never an outright lie, just the truth deployed at exactly the right moment to accomplish something she wanted. "Emily teaches kindergarten. In a room full of investors and board members and women whose handbags cost more than Emily's monthly rent. Emily teaches kindergarten, as in, she's not really one of us." "Oh, how sweet," said the woman. Emily smiled. It was a reflex. The thing about Adrian Sterling was that he didn't want to be there either. He stood near the back of the ballroom with a glass of whiskey he'd been nursing for 40 minutes, watching the room with the practiced patience of a man who had learned, over years of obligation, how to be present in body while remaining elsewhere in his mind. He was 32 years old, and he had $17 billion and a 5-year-old son named Max, who had asked him that morning, very seriously, whether he absolutely had to go to the party, because they had been in the middle of building a Lego spaceship and it wasn't going to build itself. "I absolutely have to go," Adrian had told him. "Why?" "Because the foundation does good work, and I sit on the board, and sometimes doing good things requires showing up to parties." Max had considered this. "That seems inefficient," he'd said. Adrian had laughed for the first time in what felt like several days. He'd ruffled his son's hair, kissed him on the top of his head, told Mrs. Huang she could put him to bed at 8:30, but that Max would try to negotiate for 9, and then he'd put on his tuxedo and driven to the Whitmore and stood in this corner for 40 minutes thinking about a half-finished Lego spaceship. He was not, as a general rule, the kind of man who attracted attention by standing still. He attracted attention constantly, relentlessly, in ways he'd mostly stopped noticing because the alternative was going insane. Women engineered reasons to be near him. Men engineered reasons to do business with him. Everyone in every room wanted something from him, and they were generally very charming about it, and he was generally very tired of it. So he stood in his corner and he watched the room, because that was what he did at parties. Watched, assessed, and waited for it to be over. That was how he saw her. He noticed the dress first, because it was impossible not to. It stood out in the room the way a wrong note stands out in a piece of music. Not ugly exactly, just profoundly out of place. The woman wearing it was standing near the center of the room with a small group, and something about her posture caught his attention. The careful stillness of someone trying very hard to take up as little space as possible. He watched. He watched the woman beside her, sleek, composed, holding court, say something to the group with a small gesture toward the woman in the lavender dress. He watched the group respond with small laughs, the kind of laughs people produce in social situations when they're not entirely sure if something is funny, but they want to seem like they're following along. He watched the woman in the lavender dress go very still. And then, this was the part that he would remember later, would keep returning to in his mind the way you keep returning to something you can't quite categorize. She didn't crumble. She didn't excuse herself, didn't look at the floor, didn't do any of the things a person does when they've been humiliated in front of witnesses. She did something that was somehow worse and better than all of those things. She smiled. A genuine, careful, dignified smile, aimed at no one in particular, and then she turned slightly away from the group in a gesture that was so calm, it almost looked like a choice, like she was choosing not to be destroyed by this. Adrian had been in a lot of rooms full of powerful people. He had been in rooms full of brilliant people, ruthless people, charming people, terrifying people. He had watched a lot of human behavior from a lot of corners. He could not remember the last time he'd seen someone demonstrate that particular kind of quiet strength. He put down his whiskey and started moving through the crowd. The confrontation, if you could call it that, because Vanessa would never have called it that, would have called it instead a helpful observation or just being honest, happened near the center of the ballroom, in front of the kind of audience that made it worse. It started because a woman named Patricia Chambers said, in the particular tone that wealthy women sometimes use when they're being welcoming, that Emily's dress was so unique, so retro, and Vanessa had seen an opening and walked right through it. "It's our mother's," Vanessa said pleasantly. "From the 80s. Emily had a little incident with her actual dress, and we had to improvise." She laughed. It was a warm laugh, a laugh that invited the group to laugh with her, and the group mostly obliged. "I keep telling her she needs to invest a little more in her wardrobe, but you know how teachers are. They're always spending their own money on their classrooms. So selfless." She made it sound like a deficiency. Emily felt it hit her in the chest. That particular impact, not quite pain, more like the recognition of pain, the understanding that something has just been done to you in public and you can't respond the way you want to because you're in public. She felt her face do the thing it always did in these moments, hold a careful, neutral expression while everything below the surface adjusted to absorb the blow. "Well," said Patricia Chambers with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "it's just a dress." "Of course," Vanessa agreed, still pleasantly. Emily has never been too worried about appearances. That's actually one of her best qualities. She's very, unassuming. The word landed like a verdict. Unassuming. In this room, in this company. Among these people who had paid $2,000 a plate to be here and came, in part because they wanted to be seen. Unassuming was not a compliment. In Vanessa's mouth, in this context, unassuming meant she doesn't belong here, and even she knows it. Emily said quietly, "Excuse me for a moment," and she turned and walked toward the terrace doors because they were the closest exit, and because she needed air, and because if she stood in that circle for one more second, she was going to do something she couldn't take back. The terrace overlooked the hotel gardens, which were lit at night with small, warm lights strung between trees. It was cool outside, the kind of October cool that was a relief after the overheated ballroom, and Emily stood at the railing and looked at the lights and breathed. She wasn't crying yet. She was in the stage before crying, the stage where everything feels very bright and very clear and very fragile, like the world has developed a thin, tight surface that might break if you press on it. She heard the door behind her open and she stiffened, hoping it wasn't Vanessa coming to check on her, which would have been worse in its own way, the concern that wasn't concern, the soft follow-up cruelty. It wasn't Vanessa. "You looked like you needed air," said a man's voice. "I apologize. I wasn't trying to follow you. I was looking for a reason to leave the party, and you gave me one." She turned. He was tall. She registered that first, and then the tuxedo, and then the face, which was the kind of face that belonged to someone who had been in magazines, not because it was conventionally handsome, but because it had specificity, a strong jaw that was slightly uneven, dark eyes that were watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. He was holding his whiskey glass loosely in one hand, and he looked, she realized, genuinely relieved to be outside. She didn't know who he was. She would learn later. In this moment, he was just a man who had apparently followed her to the terrace, and she was too tired to be politely evasive. "The air helped," she said. "Good." He moved to stand at the railing a few feet away from her, looking out at the gardens. Not at her. That was which, she would think later, one of the first things she noticed about him. He didn't stare. "It's a beautiful garden." "It is." A pause. The kind of pause that happens between two people who don't know each other and are both trying to figure out if conversation is something they want. "I saw what happened in there," he said. She went still. "It wasn't. You don't have to explain it to me." He said it simply without looking at her. "I'm not asking for an explanation. I just wanted you to know that I saw it, because sometimes it matters to have a witness, someone who can confirm that the thing that happened was the thing that happened." Emily stared at the side of his face for a long moment. "That's an unusual thing to say," she said finally. "Probably." He glanced at her then. A quick, direct look. "I'm Adrian." "Emily." "Do you come to these things often, Emily?" The question was so ordinary that she almost laughed. "No, my sister brought me. She had connections." "And did she mention that she was going to put you in a dress she had specifically selected to make you feel bad?" The question landed with a clarity that surprised her. Not because it was cruel, but because it was exact. Because in all the years of Vanessa's small, calculated cruelties, Emily couldn't remember the last time someone had named one out loud with that kind of precision. "She said my dress had a stain," Emily said. "Did it?" "No." He nodded once slowly. "Okay," he said. They stood at the railing for a while. Below them, the lights in the garden swayed slightly in the breeze. "I almost didn't come tonight," she said eventually. She didn't know why she was telling him this. "I don't really belong at things like this." "Nobody really belongs at things like this," he said. "The people who look most comfortable are usually the best actors." "You don't look uncomfortable." "I'm an excellent actor." He said it without any particular vanity, just as a fact. "I've been practicing for years." He looked at her again. "You, on the other hand, are a terrible actor. You felt every single thing that happened in there, and it showed, even though you were clearly trying very hard to make sure it didn't." "Is that a criticism?" He considered the question seriously, which she found unexpectedly charming. "No," he said. "I think it's the opposite." She didn't know how long they stood on the terrace. 15 minutes, maybe 20. Long enough that she told him she was a kindergarten teacher, and he told her he had a 5-year-old, and she watched his face change when he said it, the careful composure loosening into something warmer, more unguarded, the way parents' faces tend to change when they talk about their children. Long enough that she learned he sat on the foundation board and had been coming to this gala every year for 4 years, and that he found it approximately as excruciating every time. "Then why do you come?" she asked. "Because the foundation does genuinely important work," he said, "and sometimes the right thing isn't the comfortable thing." "That sounds like something a kindergarten teacher would say." "Does it?" He almost smiled. Not quite. She noticed, in the way you notice things when you're not trying to, that he was thoughtful in his pauses, that he didn't fill silence reflexively, didn't rush to occupy every gap with sound. It was a quality she associated with people who had learned to be genuinely still, and it was rare enough that it registered. What she didn't know, because she couldn't have known it, was that he was having a similar experience on his end, that she was, to him, a genuinely puzzling quantity. That the women he encountered in rooms like this were almost uniformly one of two things: aggressively self-promotional or aggressively self-effacing, both of them performances, both of them aimed at producing a specific outcome. Emily was neither. She was just present, honest in a way that felt unrehearsed. He found himself not wanting to go back inside. He found himself going back inside anyway, because the evening's program was beginning and he was expected, and because he was the kind of man who showed up when he was expected to. But before he went, he said, "Wait here for a moment." She raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I'm going to ask you to dance, and I want you to have time to decide if you're going to say yes. She stared at him. You don't have to do that. I know. He was already moving toward the door. Decide. The ballroom had settled into the rhythm of a gala, in full swing, conversations growing louder, laughter more frequent, the music shifting from background decoration to something more present and deliberate. Vanessa was standing with the Chambers group, working the room with the focused efficiency of someone who had done her research and knew exactly who in the room was worth talking to. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. It was, in Emily's honest assessment, one of her sister's genuine talents, the ability to read a social landscape and position herself within it with precision. What she was not expecting was Adrian Sterling. She had noticed him earlier, of course, had noticed him the way every person in the room had noticed him, because that was what happened when a man with his particular combination of wealth and reputation walked into a space. She had noted his position near the back of the room and had made a mental calculation about whether it was worth attempting an approach, and had decided the answer was no, not yet. The timing wasn't right. She had not factored her sister into the calculation. She would remember later, the moment she realized what was happening, the way the music had shifted, the way the dance floor had cleared slightly, creating that unconscious parting that happens when someone significant moves through a crowd. She had turned, and there was Emily, her sister, in their mother's 1987 lavender dress, with the hemline that hit wrong and the silhouette that belonged to a different decade, and beside Emily was Adrian Sterling, extending his hand. Vanessa's first thought was, that can't be right. Her second thought was not a thought at all. It was a feeling, and it was so sudden and so complete that it temporarily displaced everything else, every calculated social awareness, every practiced composure, every year of telling herself that she was the one who had made something of herself, that she was the one who moved in these circles, that Emily, sweet, ordinary Emily, with her kindergarten classroom and her second-hand car and her unwillingness to want more than she had, Emily was the one who didn't belong here, except that Adrian Sterling was holding out his hand to Emily, and the room was watching. Emily, for her part, was not thinking about the room. She was thinking about the question Adrian had asked her on the terrace. Wait here. Decide. She was thinking about the fact that she had decided, and that the decision had surprised her, and that she was not entirely sure what she was doing, but that standing here with this man she'd known for 20 minutes, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel tonight, like herself. Specifically, recognizably, uncomplicatedly herself. She took his hand. They walked onto the dance floor, and the music began, and the room fell quiet. In the way rooms fall quiet when something unexpected is happening and everyone wants to see how it ends. Emily was not a graceful dancer. She knew this about herself and had made a kind of peace with it. She stepped on his foot twice within the first 30 seconds, and the first time she winced and said, "I'm so sorry," and the second time she looked up at him and said, "I should have warned you," and he said very quietly, "I have 2 good feet still. We're fine," and the corner of his mouth turned up just slightly, and she laughed. It was not the picture of elegance, but they kept dancing. Vanessa didn't say anything that night. She found Emily by the coats at the end of the evening, and she was very composed, very smooth, and she said nothing about Adrian Sterling or the dance or the fact that the room had watched with a kind of attention that had clearly not been directed at Vanessa at any point during the evening. She talked about the traffic and whether their mother would be awake when they got home, and whether Emily needed to take the highway or the surface streets. Emily let her talk. In the car, on the way home, Vanessa was quiet for a long time, and then she said, in a voice that was very carefully neutral, "Did you know him? Before tonight?" "No." Another silence. "He's very wealthy," Vanessa said. The observation seemed to cost her something. "I suppose you know that." "I didn't actually, not until near the end." Emily watched the streetlights pass. "He was kind." Vanessa kept her eyes on the road. She didn't say anything else. Emily sat in the passenger seat and thought about a man standing on a terrace with a whiskey glass, looking at garden lights and saying, "Sometimes it matters to have a witness." She thought about the way he had held out his hand in the middle of a ballroom without making it a performance, without any announcement, just a hand extended and a choice offered. She thought about how she had stepped on his feet twice, and he had said, "We're fine." She didn't know what any of it meant. She didn't try to decide. She was too tired and too full of the evening and too aware that life, in her experience, was not the kind of thing that resolved itself cleanly into meanings. You lived through things, and later, sometimes, they made sense. She looked out the window at the passing city and let it go for tonight. 2 days later, her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She was at her kitchen table grading sight word worksheets, a stack of papers covered in uncertain letters, each one representing a small person's attempt to make language make sense. And her phone was across the table, and she was in the middle of evaluating whether a letter that was either a B or a D was an acceptable attempt at the word bed, and she nearly let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. "Emily Carter?" "Yes." "This is Adrian Sterling." A brief pause. "From the gala. You stepped on my feet." She put down the worksheet. "I'm aware," she said. "I wanted to call and check that you were all right after the evening. I thought about it, and I wasn't sure if I made the situation better or worse." The honesty of it caught her off guard. She had expected, if she'd been expecting anything, which she hadn't, something smoother, something with a clear objective. Not, "I wasn't sure if I made the situation better or worse." "Better," she said. "You made it better." "Good." He sounded genuinely relieved. "I'd like to take you to coffee, if you're willing. I recognize that's an unusual thing to propose the day after you met someone at a charity gala." "Slightly unusual," she agreed. "I'm prepared to accept that it's slightly unusual. Are you free Saturday?" She looked at the stack of worksheets. She thought about her sister and the lavender dress, and the room going quiet when she walked onto the dance floor. She thought about what it had meant to stand on that terrace with a stranger who understood the vocabulary of the specific kind of loneliness she'd been feeling without her having to explain any of it. "Saturday works," she said. She met him at a small coffee place in a neighborhood that was just beginning to become fashionable, the kind of block that still had a dry cleaner and a hardware store between the new places, where the gentrification was visible but hadn't yet completed its project. He was there before her, which she hadn't expected, sitting at a corner table with a coffee and his phone face down on the table. He looked different in daylight, less formal, less constructed. He was wearing a dark sweater and jeans, and his hair was slightly messy in the way that meant he'd run a hand through it sometime that morning and not thought about it since. He looked like someone who was used to inhabiting his own body without performing it. He stood when he saw her come in, not in a theatrical way, just as a gesture. She sat down across from him, and they ordered, and then they were two people in a coffee shop on a Saturday morning, and it was remarkably ordinary, and somehow the ordinariness of it was the thing that made it feel real. "How's the spaceship?" she asked, because he'd mentioned Max and the Lego project on the terrace, and she remembered things. He looked startled, a quick, genuine flicker of surprise. "Almost finished," he said. "We decided the engine configuration needed to be reconsidered." "Big decision?" "Significant." He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. "Max has very specific engineering standards." "How old did you say he was?" 5. He'll be 6 in February. He said it the way parents say their children's ages, with a precision that implied the specific number mattered, that 5 and 6 were not interchangeable quantities. "He's a serious kid. He was born serious. I have no idea where he gets it." "You seem fairly serious yourself." "I seem serious. He is serious. There is a distinction." He paused. His mother was serious too. She was the one who kept both of us honest. She died when Max was 2. He said it plainly, without preamble, and she respected that. The people she knew who had experienced grief tended to fall into 2 categories: those who never mentioned it, building silence around it like a wall, and those who offered it up immediately, weaponizing it into a narrative. He did neither. He just stated it as a fact about the landscape of his life. "This is a thing that happened. Now you know." "I'm sorry," she said. "Thank you." He met her eyes. "I don't say it to create a moment. I say it because it explains something about why Max is the way he is, and why I am the way I am, and it seemed like information you should have." "It's useful information," she agreed. He almost smiled again, the same almost smile from the terrace. "You're very direct." "You started it." This time he actually smiled. It changed his face considerably. Bah. They talked for 2 hours. Later she would have trouble accounting for all of it. Where the time went, how the conversation moved from one thing to the next, the way that happens when you're talking to someone whose mind works in a way that's interesting to follow. He asked her about teaching in a way that suggested he was actually curious, and not just making conversation. What it was like in the classroom, what the kids were like, what she found hard about it, and what she found worth it. She found herself being honest in ways she wasn't usually honest in early conversations, in part because he was honest back. He told her about the company he'd built, but he also told her about the year it almost failed, the decision he'd made that almost destroyed everything, the fact that he'd been so certain he was right and had been so completely wrong. He told it without self-deprecation, not performing humility, just accurately reporting events. "You learned something," she said. "I learned a lot of things. Mostly, I learned that being right about the general shape of something doesn't mean you're right about the specific execution. I see that now. At the time, I was just terrified and exhausted and trying not to show either. But you showed it eventually?" "To one person." He was quiet for a moment. "Catherine, Max's mother. She was the only person I've ever been consistently honest with about the things I was afraid of." He looked at his coffee cup. "I don't actually know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because I'm a stranger. Maybe." He looked up. "Or maybe not quite a stranger. I'm not sure yet." She thought about that for a moment. "I'm not sure yet either," she said honestly. The coffee shop filled up around them and emptied again, and they kept talking, and neither of them mentioned that they should probably go. When they finally left, standing outside on the sidewalk in the October morning air, he said, "I'd like to see you again. I want to be direct about that rather than find an oblique way to suggest it." She looked at him. The messy hair, the dark sweater, the very slightly uneven jaw, the quality of his attention, which was the most specific thing about him, the way he listened like you were worth listening to. "I'd like that too," she said. He nodded once. "Okay then." They went in opposite directions, and Emily walked 4 blocks to where she'd parked her car and sat in it for a moment without starting it, just sitting with the particular feeling of something beginning. Not a feeling of certainty. She was 30 years old and had been certain about things before and had been wrong, but a feeling of possibility, of a door being open. She was aware in the back of her mind that there were complications, that she lived in an apartment with a broken radiator and graded sight word worksheets on her kitchen table, that he had $17 billion or something in that vicinity, and she'd looked him up the night before in a moment of curiosity she'd felt slightly embarrassed about, and had closed the browser window before she'd finished reading. That the world he moved in and the world she moved in were so different that she wasn't sure they occupied the same reality in any meaningful sense. She was also aware that he had told her about Catherine, that he had said she was the only person I've ever been consistently honest with, and then had immediately started being honest with her, that he had come to find her on a terrace because he'd watched someone be cruel to her and had wanted her to have a witness, that people were not reducible to their bank accounts, and neither for that matter was she reducible to her apartment or her broken radiator or the gap between what she made and what she needed. She started the car. She drove home. She set aside the lavender dress, which she'd brought home in a paper bag and hadn't touched since the gala, and she thought, "I'll deal with that later." She went back to the sight word worksheets because 23 kindergartners were going to need them on Monday, and they weren't going to grade themselves. She worked until late, and she was tired, but underneath the tiredness was something lighter, something that had not been there on Friday. She didn't name it. It was too early to name things. But it was there. The second Saturday became a third, and the third became a fourth, and somewhere between the coffee shop on the edge of the gentrifying block and a Sunday afternoon at a farmer's market where Adrian had looked at an heirloom tomato with the focused seriousness of a man examining a quarterly report, Emily stopped counting the occasions and started simply showing up to them. It wasn't easy. That was the first honest thing she could say about what was developing between them. It was not easy, and it was not simple, and anyone who looked at the two of them from the outside would have seen exactly what she herself saw. Two people from such different latitudes of life, that the logistics alone should have been prohibitive. He sent a car for her the first time he invited her to his house. Not a car service, not an Uber, a car, a specific car, dark and quiet with leather seats and a driver named Gerald, who knew her name before she gave it and who asked her in a tone of complete professional neutrality whether she preferred the air conditioning at the current level or would like it adjusted. She said it was fine. She sat in the back of the car and looked out the window and watched the neighborhood she lived in give way to other neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods give way to wider streets and taller gates, and the kind of architecture that didn't happen by accident, that required decisions about stone versus brick, about setback from the street, about what the word home was supposed to communicate to a person standing outside it. She had told herself, during the drive, that she was prepared. She was 30 years old. She had seen photographs online of the Sterling house because she had looked it up in another moment of curiosity she'd felt slightly embarrassed about. This one she had not closed the browser window on, and she understood intellectually that it was large, that it was impressive, that it occupied a different order of magnitude than the apartment she shared with her radiator and her grating and her stack of library books on the kitchen table. What she had not fully prepared for was the feeling of standing in the driveway of it. It was not the size exactly. It was the quality of everything. The way even the gravel under her feet had been chosen deliberately. The way the trees along the drive had been placed to create a sense of arrival. The way the house itself sat back from the world with a kind of settled authority that said, "I have been here a long time, and I expect to be here considerably longer." It was the feeling of being somewhere that had resources she didn't have language for. She stood in the driveway for a moment longer than was probably natural. Then the front door opened and a small person in a dinosaur sweatshirt came running down the steps at a speed that suggested the concept of caution was entirely theoretical. "Are you Emily?" the small person demanded, stopping about 18 inches from her with the absolute confidence of someone who had not yet learned that demanding information from strangers was considered socially unusual. She crouched down to his level, which put them approximately eye to eye. He had his father's dark eyes and a seriousness of expression that was all his own, watchful and assessing and slightly skeptical, the face of a child who had clearly learned that not every adult who showed up in his life was worth his time. "I'm Emily," she said. "Are you Max?" "Yes." He examined her with the thoroughness of a small scientist. "My dad says you're a teacher. Kindergarten, for kids about 2 years younger than you. Do they know how to read yet?" "That's what we're working on." He appeared to find this acceptable. "I can read," he said. "Not boasting, just reporting a fact." "I've been reading since I was 4. What do you like to read?" He tilted his head. It was a precise, considered gesture. "Non-fiction," he said with complete seriousness. Behind her, she heard Adrian's voice. "Max, you were supposed to wait inside." "I did wait inside, then I came outside." Max turned to look at his father with the serene logic of someone who believed this distinction was self-evidently important. "Those are different things." Adrian had come down the steps and was standing beside Emily now, and he looked, she caught it in the half-second before he composed himself, mortified. Not theatrically, but genuinely, the way a parent gets mortified when their child does something that is simultaneously entirely predictable and impossible to have prevented. "Hi," he said to her. "Hi," she said back. Max looked between the two of them. "Are you going to be awkward for long?" he asked. "Because the spaceship still needs the landing struts." Emily laughed, a real laugh, not a polite one. It came out before she could decide whether it was appropriate, which was always the sign of a real laugh. Adrian looked at her when she laughed, and something in his face shifted slightly. That same quality she'd noticed the first night, the imperceptible loosening that happened when he stopped performing composure and became briefly, purely present. "Landing struts first," he said to Max, "then dinner." Max nodded, satisfied, and turned and walked back up the steps with the purposefulness of someone who had places to be. They followed him inside. The inside of the house was not what she had expected either. She had expected it to feel like a showroom, something curated and impressive and slightly cold, the way she'd always imagined the houses of wealthy people from the outside. Instead, it felt like a place where a person actually lived, which is a different thing entirely. There were books on actual shelves, not decorative arrangements of spines, but real stacks of actual books, with broken spines and bookmarks sticking out of them. There was a child's drawing taped to the refrigerator in the kitchen, a spaceship, she assumed, rendered in crayon with the confident structural inaccuracy of a 5-year-old who knows exactly what he wants to communicate. There were shoes by the door that weren't arranged neatly. There was evidence everywhere of a real and ongoing life. She felt herself relax in a way she hadn't known she was braced against. They worked on the landing struts for 45 minutes. Or rather, Max worked on the landing struts and occasionally asked Emily for a specific piece by color, which she supplied, and Adrian sat on the floor beside them with his back against the couch in a posture that was entirely at odds with the tuxedo she'd first seen him in, loose-limbed and unhurried, occasionally offering an opinion that Max considered with the same rigorous skepticism he appeared to apply to all incoming information. "That configuration won't hold under atmospheric re-entry stress," Max said at one point about something his father had suggested. "It's a Lego spaceship," Adrian said. "The physics still matters." "Correct," Emily said without looking up from the piece she was searching for. Adrian looked at her. She could feel it without seeing it. "You're taking his side," he said. "I'm acknowledging a valid point," she said. "There's a distinction." Max made a small sound that might have been approval. Later, after Max had been taken upstairs by Mrs. Huang with the negotiated compromise of 8:45 instead of 8:30, a negotiation that Max had conducted with such careful procedural precision that Emily had to press her lips together to keep from smiling. She and Adrian sat in the kitchen while he made something she would charitably describe as pasta, and they talked. This was becoming its own thing, the talking. It was the part she found herself thinking about in the middle of teaching the letter G or sorting the reading levels in her classroom or lying awake on Tuesday nights at 2 a.m. when the radiator clicked and she couldn't sleep. The conversations were not remarkable in the way that romantic conversations in stories are often presented as remarkable. Nobody said anything that would have fit on a card. They talked about Max's reading habits and the book Emily was currently in the middle of, and a decision Adrian was trying to make about a business acquisition that he was explaining, she realized, not for advice, but because he wanted to think through it out loud with someone who would actually listen rather than agree. "What happens if you don't do it?" she asked. "Nothing immediately. The company continues as it is." "And if you do?" "Maybe a lot. Maybe nothing." He stirred the pasta. "That's the honest answer. The projection models say one thing. My instinct says another. I've been wrong about both before. Which one is winning right now?" He paused. "Instinct," he said. "It usually does." He glanced at her. "That's not necessarily a compliment to myself. Instinct can be another word for what you want to believe." She thought about that. "What does instinct say about the acquisition specifically?" "That the numbers are real, but the culture isn't. That you can buy a company and not buy the thing that made it worth buying." Turned off the stove. "That some things don't transfer." "Do you want to believe that?" He looked at her for a moment. "I want to believe I can tell the difference," he said. "That's a different thing." This was what the conversations were like. Not romantic, not in the traditional sense, but intimate in a way that she was finding harder and harder to minimize. The pasta was not very good. She ate it anyway and told him it was good, and he said, "You don't have to do that." And she said, "It's fine." And he said, "It's overcooked and I know it." And she said, "Okay, it's a little overcooked." And he laughed, and she decided that she liked his laugh. Not the almost smile, which she'd seen several times now, but the real laugh, which was not elegant at all, which was in fact somewhat ungainly and entirely sincere. She was in trouble, she thought, on the drive home in Gerald's quiet car. She looked at the passing lights of the city and considered the shape of the trouble she was in, which was not catastrophic, but was significant. She was 30 years old, and she had been careful. She had been careful about a lot of things: her money, her expectations, the specific distance she kept between herself and situations that had the potential to make her feel bad. It was not timidity, exactly. It was the particular self-preservation of someone who had grown up in a house where Vanessa's needs occupied most of the available emotional real estate, and who had learned early that the safest strategy was to keep yourself small enough that you didn't become a target. She was not keeping herself small with Adrian. She was not entirely sure how she felt about that. She was not entirely sure how she felt about him, for that matter. She was not someone who moved fast, and she was wary of the particular intoxication of being chosen, of the way it felt to have someone pay attention to you in a room full of other options, and the temptation to confuse that feeling with something more solid and durable than it might actually be. She thought about Max and his nonfiction books, and his landing struts, and the way he had looked at her, skeptically, honestly, without performing anything. She thought about Adrian stirring overcooked pasta and admitting that instinct could be another word for what you want to believe. She thought about the drawing taped to the refrigerator. She watched the city pass, and she didn't decide anything because it was too early to decide things. And she had learned enough about herself to know that her best decisions came from waiting rather than from the particular urgency of wanting something. But she was aware, sitting in the back of the quiet car with the October night outside the window, that she was no longer keeping herself small. She wasn't sure yet whether that was terrifying or something else entirely. 3 weeks into whatever this was, Vanessa called. Emily was at school during the call, and she saw the name on her screen between the second and third period, during the transition when her kids were washing their hands, and she was putting up the alphabet cards they'd need for the afternoon activity. She let it go to voicemail. Then she listened to the voicemail on her lunch break in the teacher's lounge while eating a turkey sandwich and trying not to let the message change the texture of her afternoon. The message was brief. Vanessa's voice was careful in the way it always was when she was being careful. "Hey, I heard you've been seeing someone. I just think we should talk. Call me back when you can." I heard you've been seeing someone. Through whom? Emily wondered. Their mother, probably, to whom Emily had mentioned, Becky, carefully, with practiced casualness, that she'd been spending some time with someone she'd met at the gala. She had not mentioned his name. She had not mentioned anything specific. But their mother, who loved both of her daughters with a thoroughness that couldn't prevent the damage they did to each other, had almost certainly told Vanessa what she knew, or hinted at it, or answered a question Vanessa had asked in a way that revealed more than it was meant to. She called back that evening because avoiding it would only make it worse. "Adrian Sterling," Vanessa said 3 seconds into the conversation, not a question. "You could have told me. We've only been seeing each other for a few weeks." Emily. Her voice had that particular patience in it, the manufactured patience of someone who is working to remain reasonable. "You know who he is?" "I know who he is." "And you don't think that's... don't you think that's something you would have mentioned? Not to Mom. To me." Emily sat on her couch with her feet tucked under her and looked at the wall. She had a print on her wall that she'd bought at a flea market years ago, a reproduction of a painting of a woman reading, which she'd always liked because the woman in the painting looked completely absorbed, like nothing outside the book existed. She looked at it now. "Vanessa," she said, "why would I have mentioned it to you?" A silence, not the comfortable kind. "Because I'm your sister. I know you're my sister." She kept her voice even. "You're also the person who put me in Mom's 1987 dress and told everyone it was because my dress had a stain on it." Another silence. "That was..." Vanessa started, stopped, started again. "I was trying to help you not look out of place. You wouldn't have fit in with those people in whatever you were going to wear. You hadn't seen what I was going to wear." "Emily, I'm not fighting with you," Emily said. "I'm just stating facts. You did something that hurt me, in front of people I didn't know, and it wasn't the first time, and I don't think you've actually processed why you did it. So I didn't call you first to tell you about Adrian because, yes, I know who he is, but mostly what I know is that he's someone who has been kind to me, and I wasn't ready to introduce that into whatever you're working through right now." The silence that followed this was the longest one. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice was different. Not softer exactly, but stripped of some of its careful management. "I'm not working through anything. Okay? I'm asking a question about my sister. Okay? Emily." A pause. "Are you actually happy?" It was not the question Emily had expected. She sat with it for a moment, turning it over. "I think so," she said. "It's early. I'm being careful. But yes, I think so." Another pause. Then Vanessa said, very quietly, "Good." She said it like it cost her something, like the word had to pass through a checkpoint before she could release it. "Good," she said again. "I'll talk to you later." She hung up first. Emily sat on her couch for a while after that, not moving, just sitting with the complexity of it. The way love and damage could exist in the same person, aimed at the same target, and the target couldn't always tell them apart. She did not call her back, but she thought about her for a long time. The first time things got genuinely hard with Adrian was about 6 weeks in, and it came from a direction Emily hadn't anticipated. Not from the wealth, not from the difference between their worlds, but from a Wednesday evening when Max had a nightmare and woke up at 11 o'clock calling for his mother. Emily wasn't there. She was home in her apartment, but Adrian told her about it the next day, in the flat, straightforward way he had of reporting facts about his emotional landscape. And what she heard underneath the facts was something that she recognized: the specific helplessness of someone who is faced with a wound they cannot fix. "He knows she's gone," Adrian said. They were in the car, driving back from a lunch that had been interrupted by 2 separate phone calls he'd had to take, and one she'd spent eating her salad alone for 11 minutes while he paced outside the restaurant window. She'd watched him through the glass, the way he moved when he was working, the speed and precision of it, the way he looked like a completely different person than the one who sat on the floor with Lego pieces. "He's known since he was 3. We've talked about it. He understands as much as a 5-year-old can understand anything." He paused. "But sometimes he wakes up and she's not there, and understanding doesn't really touch it, you know?" "Yes," she said. He glanced at her. "You've lost someone?" "No, not like that." She thought about how to say it. "But I've learned that understanding a thing and being at peace with a thing are different processes. You can know exactly why something is the way it is and still grieve it." He was quiet for a while. "He asked me something last week," he said. "He asked me if it was okay to like you. He said it like that. He said, 'Dad, is it okay if I like Emily?'" She felt something move in her chest. "What did you say?" "I said yes. I said that liking people is always allowed." He kept his eyes on the road. And then he said, "Do you like her?" And I said yes. He paused. And he considered that for about 30 seconds, and then he said, "Okay," and went back to his book. Emily looked out the window. "Non-fiction?" she said. "Volcanoes," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Adrian," she said. "Yeah. I want to be honest with you about something." He nodded. "Okay. I'm trying to be careful about what I'm becoming to Max. Because he's 5 and he just told his father it was okay to like someone, and that's a significant thing to do. And I don't want to be someone who gets attached to him. And then I just want to be honest that I'm thinking about that I'm not taking it casually." He looked at her for a moment, a quick, direct look. "I know," he said. "I'm thinking about it too." He turned back to the road. "I wouldn't have introduced you to him if I wasn't." "I know that." "Okay," he said. They drove in silence for a while. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence 2 people occupy when they've said something true and are letting it settle before they build on top of it. "He woke me up at 11:30 last night," Adrian said eventually. "And I went into his room, and he was sitting up in bed, and I asked him what the nightmare was about, and he said," he stopped. His jaw tightened for a moment. "He said he dreamed that he couldn't remember what her voice sounded like." Emily said nothing. "She used to sing," Adrian said. "She had a terrible singing voice, genuinely bad. She sang anyway." "It was one of the things she did that drove me crazy in the best way possible." He paused. "I have videos. I showed him one afterward. At midnight, sitting on his bedroom floor with my phone. He watched it twice, and then he said, 'Okay,' and went back to sleep." He exhaled. "I sat outside his room for an hour after that." "Of course you did," she said. He glanced at her. "You say that like it's obvious." "Because it is." He turned back to the road. His hands on the wheel were not entirely steady. This was the part of him, she thought, that he didn't let people see. The competent exterior was real. The man who built things and made decisions and occupied rooms with authority. That was real, not a performance. But this was also real. The man who sat outside his son's bedroom door at midnight because the nightmare had been about forgetting the sound of a dead woman's voice. She reached over and put her hand on his forearm. Just that. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything either. They drove the rest of the way without talking, and it was the first entirely comfortable silence they'd ever been in together, and she thought, this is when it became something different. Not the gala, not the terrace, not the coffee shop or the Lego spaceship or the overcooked pasta. This. The Saturday after that, she came to the house in the afternoon, and Max was at the kitchen table with a library book open to a page of photographs of volcanic rock formations, and he looked up when she came in and said, with complete seriousness, "Did you know that some volcanoes on the ocean floor are taller than Everest?" "I didn't know that," she said. "It's because of the sea level," he said. "They're measured differently." He looked back at his book. "It's interesting. It sounds interesting." "You can read it when I'm done," he offered. It was, she understood, a significant gesture. "I'd like that," she said. She sat down at the table across from him and took out the papers she'd brought to grade, because she'd learned that Max didn't always want to be entertained and that he didn't require her to perform attentiveness. That he was, in fact, most comfortable when the people around him were engaged in their own work, occupying the same space without making demands of each other. They sat like that for a while. Max reading about volcanoes, Emily grading phonics assessments, the house quiet around them in the way of a house where somebody is actually home. Adrian came in from his office and stopped in the doorway of the kitchen and just stood there for a moment, looking at the two of them at the table. He didn't say anything. He went to the kitchen counter and made himself coffee, and then he sat down at the table with his laptop, and the three of them worked in the same room, and nobody talked much. And it was the most comfortable Emily had felt in longer than she could remember. She didn't examine it too closely because she'd learned that examining something too closely could be another way of deciding it wasn't allowed to be what it was. She just sat at the table and graded her papers and let it be what it was. The thing about happiness is that it tends to be visible, not always in dramatic ways, Jay, not in the ways that make good stories, the way grief or triumph or anger is visible. Happiness shows up in smaller things, in the way you answer when someone asks how you're doing, and whether you reach for your phone in idle moments or let the idleness just be idle, in what you look forward to when you wake up on a Saturday morning. Emily's mother noticed first because mothers tend to. "You look different," her mother said, on a Sunday afternoon in November, sitting across from Emily at the kitchen table in the house where Emily had grown up, with cups of tea between them and the particular quality of afternoon light that comes through north-facing windows in autumn. "Good different." "It's cold," Emily said. "I got a new coat." "It's not the coat." Her mother wrapped both hands around her mug. She was a small woman who had worked as a school librarian for 30 years, and she had the quality that the best librarians have: a patience with information, a willingness to wait for things to arrive at their own pace. "Is it the man?" Emily looked at her tea. "Probably partly," she admitted. "Tell me about him." "You've heard about him." "I've heard Vanessa's version," her mother said carefully, "which was that he's very wealthy and you've been spending a lot of time with him. That's not really telling me about him." Emily thought about this. She thought about what she knew, by now, that was actually worth telling. "He's a father first," she said. "That's the thing that's most true about him. He has a 5-year-old named Max who reads nonfiction and has very specific engineering opinions. And when Max has a nightmare, Adrian sits outside his bedroom door for an hour afterward." She paused. "He's honest in a way that can be uncomfortable. He doesn't soften things to make them easier to hear. And he listens. Actually listens, not just waiting for his turn to talk." Her mother watched her. "You like him?" "Yes." There was no point in being cagey about it. "I like him. I'm also being careful because there are 100 good reasons to be careful, and I'm not in the habit of ignoring good reasons." "What are the good reasons?" Emily looked at the window. The light was going thin and golden, the way it does in November when the afternoon is almost done. "He's in a different world," she said. "Not just the money, everything. The way he moves through the world, the things he has access to, the things that are normal for him that I have no reference point for. And there's Max, which is its own category of careful. And there's... She stopped. What? She was quiet for a moment. I'm not very experienced at being cared about, she said. That's not self-pity. It's just true. I've spent a lot of years making myself unobtrusive, and someone paying attention to me is... It takes some getting used to. I want to make sure I'm responding to him and not just to the feeling of being noticed. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That's a very self-aware thing to know about yourself. I've had a lot of time to think about it. Vanessa's not... Her mother stopped, started again. She doesn't mean it the way it comes out. You know that. Emily looked at her. There were things she could have said to this. She said the one that was most accurate. I know she doesn't mean it to go as far as it goes. I'm not sure that's quite the same thing. Her mother looked at the table. She had the expression of a woman who has spent decades loving two people who hurt each other and has never found a good solution to this. I'm not angry at her, Emily said, which was mostly true. I'm trying to understand something about us that I haven't understood before, about why she does what she does. Because it's not nothing. It's been going on long enough that it's not nothing. Her mother nodded slowly. She chose her words. She's always compared herself to you, since you were very small. I used to think she'd outgrow it. What did she compare? I never understood what there was to compare. She was always the accomplished one. You were always the one people were drawn to, her mother said simply. And that's not something you can achieve. Either you have it, or you don't. Vanessa achieved everything she set out to achieve, and then she'd walk into a room and people would still find you first. She paused. I think that's felt very unfair to her for a very long time. Emily sat with this. She thought about Vanessa at the gala, the emerald gown, the practiced ease, the way she'd worked the room with such deliberate skill. She thought about the moment Vanessa had watched Adrian walk onto the dance floor toward Emily, and the expression she'd seen on her sister's face from across the room. Not anger exactly, something older and rawer than anger. She thought about what it would be like to want something that badly and to not be able to earn it, no matter how hard you worked. She didn't say any of this to her mother. She said, I should get going. I have papers to grade. Her mother walked her to the door and hugged her with the particular fierceness of a woman who has always loved more than she could adequately express. Bring him sometime, she said. When you're ready, I want to meet him. Okay, Emily said. She walked to her car in the November afternoon and sat in it for a moment before starting it, thinking about what her mother had said. People would still find you first. She had never thought of herself as someone who was found. She had thought of herself as someone who moved carefully through rooms, as someone who tried not to take up too much space, as someone who had learned to make herself small enough not to be a target. And yet, she started the car and drove home through the late November afternoon, and she thought about what it meant to be someone who was found, not just by Adrian, but in the general sense of the thing, and whether that was something she had been actively hiding or something she simply hadn't known was there. She thought about a man on a terrace saying, sometimes it matters to have a witness. She thought about a 5-year-old asking his father if it was okay to like someone. She drove home. She graded her papers. She went to bed at 10:30 with her library book and her clicking radiator and the feeling, cautious, careful, genuinely unfamiliar, that something in her life was shifting in a direction she hadn't planned for and could not yet fully see. She let it shift. She was terrified. She let it shift anyway. December came in cold and specific, the kind of cold that has intention behind it. Not the vague chill of late autumn, but real winter, settling in with the permanence of something that planned to stay. Emily's classroom smelled like construction paper, and the particular brand of hand sanitizer the school district bought in bulk. And her 23 kindergartners were entering the phase of the year where the novelty of school had worn off enough that the real personalities were beginning to show. She loved this phase, she always had. The first 6 weeks of the school year were performance, the children performing their best behavior, she performing her most welcoming authority. But by December they had all stopped performing and were simply being, which was when the real work happened, and when, if she was honest, the real reward did too. She knew which of her kids needed to hold something tactile to concentrate, which ones were listening even when they looked distracted, which ones were 3 months ahead of where they appeared to be, and which ones were working harder than they let on. She knew Marcus picked at the corner of his worksheet when he was struggling with something he didn't want to ask for help with, and that Lily preferred to be called on rather than to volunteer, and that both of those things were information she could use. This was the work she actually knew how to do. The terrain of it was familiar in a way that nothing else in her life had been, lately. She was at her desk during the lunch hour, writing progress notes, when her phone buzzed with a message from Adrian. Max wants to know if you'll be here Saturday. He has a hypothesis about the spaceship's fuel efficiency that he wants to test, and apparently I'm not qualified to assist. She read it twice and felt the particular warmth of it. Not the dramatic heat of something new, but the steadier warmth of something that was becoming a pattern, becoming reliable, becoming the kind of thing you could count on when you added it to the category of things you could count on. She typed back, "Tell him I'll bring my calculations." The response came 40 seconds later. He says, "Good." I say, "Thank you." Those are different things, but both are true. She put the phone face down on her desk and went back to her progress notes, and the warmth stayed. It had been 2 months since the gala. 2 months of Saturdays and a handful of weekday evenings, and 3 Sunday afternoons at the house with Max and his books, and his precise evaluating silences. 2 months of learning the specific texture of who Adrian Sterling was when he wasn't performing capability, the habits and preferences and small irritabilities and moments of genuine tenderness that added up, gradually, to a person rather than a public figure. She knew that he took his coffee without sugar, and that this was a point of mild pride with him, the way small austerities sometimes are with people who have access to every comfort. She knew that he read contracts the way other people read novels. Intensely, in long, uninterrupted stretches, with the focused absorption of someone who found the precise architecture of language genuinely interesting. She knew that he was a worse driver than Gerald by a significant margin, and that this annoyed him. She knew that he sometimes called her on weeknight evenings, not to say anything particular, but simply to talk while he made Max's dinner, and that these were some of her favorite conversations because the absence of agenda made them honest in a different way than conversations with agenda tended to be. She knew that he was still learning how to include someone in the life he'd built around the absence of inclusion, that there were moments when she could feel him pulling back slightly. Not from her specifically, but from the vulnerability of needing someone again, which was a different thing and one she recognized. She did not push. She was constitutionally incapable of pushing, which was both her best and worst quality depending on the situation. What she did not know yet, what she would not know until it arrived with the particular violent clarity of things that have been building underground for a long time, was how much damage her sister was still capable of doing. That arrived on a Thursday evening in December. Their mother called at 7:15, which was unusual. Their mother generally had sent texts exclusively for the last 4 years with the comfortable efficiency of a woman who had discovered that texting eliminated the need to think of a way to end a phone call. "Mom?" Emily had her laptop open on the couch, was in the middle of downloading a new set of phonics resources her colleague had recommended. "Is everything okay?" "I need you to come over," her mother said. Her voice had the quality of someone who has been sitting with something for a while and has finally decided they can't sit with it alone anymore. "Vanessa is here. She came this afternoon. I think you need to hear this." "Hear what?" A pause. "Please just come, Emily." She came. Vanessa was sitting at the kitchen table when Emily arrived, and the sight of her was slightly shocking, not because of anything dramatic, but because of the absence of the usual careful assembly. Vanessa was always put together. It was a discipline she maintained the way some people maintain physical fitness, with daily commitment and visible result. But tonight her hair was pulled back without particular attention, and she was wearing an ordinary sweater, and she looked like a woman who had recently cried and had stopped bothering to manage the evidence of it. Their mother was standing by the counter with her tea, performing the particular task of making herself invisible that she had been performing for most of their adult lives, when both daughters were in the same room. Emily sat down across from her sister. "Vanessa." Vanessa looked at the table. "I did something," she said. The words landed flat and without preamble, and Emily felt the particular alert of someone who has learned that this specific combination, her sister, the table, those words, generally precedes information she won't enjoy having. "Okay," she said carefully. I called someone at the Sterling Group. Vanessa kept looking at the table. Someone I know through one of my professional contacts who works in their PR division. I called her and I told her that I suggested that you were seeing him for reasons that weren't. She stopped. That you had a plan, that you were deliberate about it. The silence that followed was very complete. Emily sat with what she'd just heard, examining it from several angles the way you examine something that doesn't make immediate sense, hoping that one of the angles will resolve it into something more manageable. It didn't resolve. You told someone at his company, Emily said slowly, that I was pursuing him deliberately for his money. Vanessa said nothing. Did it go further than her? I don't know. It came out almost inaudibly. I don't know if she said anything to anyone or if I don't know. Emily stood up. She was not a person who stood up dramatically. As a general rule, she was someone who stayed seated, who modulated, who chose the measured response. Standing up was involuntary. The body's response to something the mind hadn't fully processed yet. Why? She said. Vanessa finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her expression had the specific openness of someone who has stopped defending themselves, which was an expression Emily was not accustomed to seeing on her sister's face, and it made things simultaneously better and worse. Because I was angry, Vanessa said. Because you have something and I... She stopped, started again, and what came out was more accurate. Because it should have been me. What should have been you? Him noticing, someone like him noticing. She said it with a rawness that was almost painful to hear. Do you have any idea what I've done? Do you know how hard I have worked to be in rooms like that, to get access, to build the kind of network that gets you invited to events like the Hargrove Gala? I've spent 10 years building that, and you came because I brought you. You came in Mom's old dress, and he chose you. Her voice broke on the last two words, not dramatically, just at the seam where something held together had given way. He didn't see me at all. I was right there, and he didn't see me at all. Emily stood on her side of the table and looked at her sister. She thought about what her mother had said on that November Sunday. People would still find you first. She had sat with that observation for weeks, had turned it over, had tried to understand what it meant about her and about Vanessa and about the specific shape of the thing between them. And she had not arrived at understanding, not fully, but she had arrived at something adjacent to it. The outline of Vanessa's pain, which was real even when the things she did with it were not. Vanessa, she said, what you did could hurt him, not me. Me, I can manage, but he has a son and a company and a reputation, and you sent a rumor into that. Do you understand that? Vanessa pressed her lips together. I know. Do you know if it went anywhere? She texted me this afternoon. She said she hadn't said anything to anyone. She said she thought I should know that it was a cruel thing to do and she wouldn't be part of it. A pause. She's right. It was a cruel thing to do. Emily sat back down because she needed to, because her legs were less steady than she would have preferred. She put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. You need to tell him, she said. Vanessa looked up sharply. Emily, I'm not negotiating this. You need to tell him what you did. Not because the information went anywhere, so it didn't, but because he should know, and because you should have to say it out loud to the person you tried to damage. She looked at her sister directly. And because I won't have a secret like that between me and someone I care about. The kitchen was very quiet. Their mother had turned to face the window above the sink. He'll hate me, Vanessa said. Maybe. Emily's voice was steady. That's a consequence of what you did. It's not a reason not to do the right thing now. Vanessa looked at her for a long time. How are you not angrier? She said. I've been waiting for you to be angrier. Emily thought about this honestly. I am angry, she said. I'll probably be angrier later when this has had more time to settle. But right now what I mostly am is tired. She looked at her sister, really looked at her, at the red-rimmed eyes and the uncharacteristic absence of armor. You've been carrying this around since you made the call, haven't you? That's why you came here today. Vanessa didn't answer, but the not answering was itself an answer. That's not nothing, Emily said. The fact that you couldn't sit with it, that's not nothing. She went home that night and sat in her apartment for a long time before she called Adrian. She rehearsed the conversation in her head several times, which was something she rarely did because she generally found rehearsal made things worse. Gave her the lines, but not the flexibility, left her performing rather than just talking. She called him at 9:30. He answered on the second ring. She could hear the house quiet behind him, which meant Max was already asleep. "Hey," he said, "everything okay?" "I need to tell you something," she said. Nothing happened, and it's been handled, but I need to tell you because I said I would be honest with you, and so I'm going to be honest with you, and I want you to know that ahead of time." A brief pause. "Okay," he said. "Tell me." She told him. The silence afterward was different from other silences she'd experienced with him. It had weight. She could feel it through the phone, the specific quality of a person absorbing information and not yet knowing what they think about it. "She works in PR," he said finally. His voice was careful in the way voices get when someone is managing their reaction. "A contact of hers does, in your company's division, but the contact didn't pass it on. She told Vanessa it was cruel and she wasn't going to be part of it." Another silence. "And you're telling me because it happened," Emily said. "Because you should know. And because the only version of this I'm willing to be part of is the one where we're honest with each other about what's actually going on in our lives, including the uncomfortable parts." She heard him exhale. "She's your sister." "Yes." And she deliberately tried to, "Yes." A pause. "Emily, I know. I'm not asking you to choose between, I know that too." She pulled her feet up onto the couch, the way she did when she was bracing for something. "She's going to call you. I told her she needed to. I don't know when, but she will. I wanted you to hear it from me first." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed slightly. Less careful, more direct. "How are you doing with it?" The question caught her slightly off guard, the way his directness sometimes did. "I'm not great," she said. "It's not the worst thing she's ever done to me, but it's the most calculated. And I keep trying to hold both things at once, that she's someone who has caused me real harm, and that she's someone who is genuinely suffering from something she doesn't know how to handle. And those things are both true, and they don't cancel each other out. And I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it tonight," he said. "I know. I mean that literally. You don't have to resolve it tonight." "I know," she said again. And then, because it was true, and she decided that true things were worth saying, "Thank you for not making this about you." A pause. "It affects me," he said, "but it's your sister. That's a different thing." A lot of people wouldn't make that distinction. A lot of people are wrong about a lot of things. She was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, the city made its night sounds, distant traffic, someone's music from a floor above, the specific urban white noise she'd stopped hearing years ago, except in moments when she was very present and very still. "Adrian," she said. "Yeah. I'm sorry she did that. You don't have to apologize for her." "I know. I'm doing it anyway." She paused. "Not on her behalf. On my own. Because she did it partly because of me, and that's part of the story whether I wanted it to be or not." He was quiet for a moment. "Go to sleep," he said. "Not unkindly. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever this is, it'll still be whatever it is tomorrow." She went to sleep. In the morning, it was still what it was. Vanessa called Adrian 4 days later. Emily didn't ask what was said. That conversation belonged to the two of them, and she had enough respect for its difficulty to leave it alone. What she knew was that it happened because Vanessa called her afterward and said, in a voice that sounded scraped clean, "I called him." "How did it go?" A pause. He was very calm. That almost made it worse." Another pause. "He said he appreciated me telling him, and that he hoped I'd take some time to think about why I'd done it." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "He said it the way a person says something when they're deciding not to say what they actually think." "Maybe," Emily said. "Or maybe that is actually what he thinks." Vanessa was quiet. He asked me one question, she said. He asked me if you knew what I'd done before I called him. I said yes. He said, she told you to call me, didn't she? It wasn't a question. A pause. I said yes. Emily waited. He said, that's exactly what I would have expected from her. Vanessa's voice was unsteady. He said it like it was the thing he most valued about you, like he was telling me something I should already know. Emily sat with this. I'm going to be in therapy, Vanessa said. I already made the appointment. I know I need to deal with some things. I've known for a while. She paused. I just kept finding reasons not to. Okay, Emily said. Are we... Vanessa stopped. Are you... Ask me again in 6 months, Emily said. Not cruelly, honestly. Right now I need some time and some distance and for you to actually do the work. But yes, eventually, we're sisters. Vanessa made the sound again. The almost laugh that was closer to relief. Okay, she said. Okay, Emily said. She hung up and sat alone in her apartment and felt the particular exhaustion that comes from a confrontation that ended correctly. Not well, not triumphantly, but correctly, which is its own kind of difficult. She texted Adrian. She called you. He texted back 4 minutes later. She did. You okay? She typed, getting there. Then because it was true, and it felt important to say, you handled that with more grace than I expected. His response came, I have my moments. Don't let it become a pattern. I have a reputation to protect. She read it twice and felt something in her chest that she didn't try to name yet because it was still too new and too large for naming. She put the phone down. She went and made tea, and she stood at her kitchen window looking at the December street below. The people bundled against the cold, a dog pulling its owner toward a tree. The particular urban ordinariness of a Thursday night. And she thought about the architecture of the year, where it had started and where it had arrived. The lavender dress and the terrace and the cold rail, and a man saying sometimes it matters to have a witness, the coffee shop, the overcooked pasta, the Lego landing struts. Max's question, Dad, is it okay if I like Emily? And the weight of what it meant that a 5-year-old who had lost his mother had found it necessary to ask permission to like someone new. She had been so careful. She had spent so many years being careful. She was still being careful, but it was a different quality of careful now. Not the careful of trying to take up as little space as possible, but the careful of someone who knows they have something worth protecting and wants to protect it well. Christmas happened the way Christmas happens when your life is in the middle of changing, present and meaningful and slightly surreal, overlaid with the awareness of how different it felt from the Christmas before. She spent Christmas Eve with her mother and was conscious of Vanessa's absence, which her mother handled with the practiced grace of a woman who has spent decades managing 2 daughters' inability to be in the same room and who had decided, this year, to simply let the absence be what it was rather than explaining it. She spent Christmas Day at Adrian's house, which had not been the plan initially. The plan had been that she would be with her mother in the morning and that Adrian and Max had family. His sister, her husband, their 2 kids, coming in from out of town. But at 7 in the morning on Christmas Day, Max had called her. Not Adrian. Max on Adrian's phone, with the directness of a child who has decided something and sees no reason to do it through intermediaries. Emily, he said, it's Christmas. I know, she said. She had been awake for 20 minutes, had been drinking coffee and watching the snow that had started overnight and was still coming down outside her window. My cousins are here. They're younger than me. He said this with the specific resignation of a person who finds younger children tiring but is prepared to manage them. Dad says you have plans. I have plans with my mom in the morning. What about after? She looked at the snow outside her window. I could probably be there around 2, she said. A pause, then, okay. And then before he handed the phone back, Emily. Yeah. Merry Christmas. She smiled at her coffee cup. Merry Christmas, Max. She came at 2. The house had the contained chaos of a place with children in it on Christmas. wrapping paper that hadn't fully been cleared, the specific noise of cousins at the age where they oscillate between playing and fighting with very little in between, the smell of something Adrian's sister was cooking in the kitchen. His sister's name was Claire, and she was 3 years older than Adrian and had the kind of face that was immediately readable, which was both her best quality and the reason her husband, a quiet man named David, periodically had to say her name in a particular tone. She looked at Emily when Adrian introduced them with an expression that was openly, unabashedly assessing. "So you're the teacher," she said. "Kindergarten," Emily confirmed. "Adrian says you're the only person Max voluntarily shared his library books with." Emily glanced at Adrian, who was carefully looking elsewhere. "He offered," she said, "volcanoes." Claire smiled, a quick, genuine smile that reorganized her face entirely. "He's a weird kid," she said. "I love him completely. He's a weird kid." "He's a great kid," Emily said. "He is." Claire tilted her head. "He asked me this morning whether I thought his fuel efficiency hypothesis was more likely to be validated or invalidated by the test he's planning." She looked at Emily. "He's 5. "Almost 6, Emily said. "He told me you were coming," Claire said. He was very matter-of-fact about it, like it was already decided. She paused, looking at Emily with the directness of someone who has appointed herself her brother's unofficial sentinel. "Are you good?" she said. "Not good in the general social sense. Actually good. For him." The question was so direct that it was almost funny. Emily looked at her steadily. "I'm trying to be," she said. Claire looked at her for another moment. "Okay," she said. Then she went back to the kitchen, and whatever she was making, Adrian appeared beside Emily. "I apologize," he said quietly. "Don't," she said. "I like her." He looked slightly surprised. "Most people find her exhausting. Most people don't like being asked direct questions." Emily watched Claire in the kitchen. "I find it refreshing." Later, in the afternoon, when the cousins had settled into a temporary detente over a shared interest in a video game, and Max was showing them, with visible condescension, how to actually play it, Emily found herself standing at the window in the living room watching the snow, which had stopped and left the world outside looking muffled and clean. Adrian came and stood beside her, not close enough to be a statement, just close enough to be present. "This was a good Christmas," he said. She considered it honestly. "It was." She paused. "Max called me himself this morning. I know. I handed him my phone and turned around and he'd already dialed." A brief silence. "I should probably have asked you first, whether you wanted to come, whether it was too much." "It wasn't too much." "You're sure?" She looked at him. He was looking at the snow, his profile in the winter light, the uneven jaw, the dark eyes, the quality of contained attention that she'd been learning to read for 2 months and could now read fairly well. He was not asking for reassurance. He was checking, genuinely, in the way a person checks when they have learned by experience that assuming everything is fine is not the same as knowing everything is fine. "I'm sure," she said. He nodded once, looked at the snow. "Adrian," she said. "Yeah." She turned toward him just slightly. "I need to tell you something." He turned to look at her. The quality of his attention sharpened. "Okay." "I'm not very good at this part," she said, "at saying things out loud. I've spent a long time keeping things internal, and I'm trying to do that less, so I'm going to say this even though it makes me uncomfortable to say it." She looked at him directly. "I love being here. With you and Max and Claire and David and the cousins. I love that Max called me himself. I love that you're someone who sits outside your son's bedroom door at midnight and who admits when the pasta is overcooked and who listened to what I said about my sister without making it about yourself." She paused. "I'm still being careful. That hasn't changed. But I want you to know that it's not because I'm uncertain about you. It's because I know enough about myself to know that I need to move at my own pace, and I'm grateful that you haven't tried to change that." Adrian was very still while she said this. He had the expression she'd come to associate with him receiving something that mattered, that particular quality of receiving without immediately processing, of letting it land before deciding what to do with it. After a moment, he said, "When Catherine was sick, before we knew how it would go, before it was definitive, She told me that the worst thing I could do was manage her. She said, I know you want to fix this and you can't, so just be here. And I wasn't good at it. I spent months trying to fix things I couldn't fix and being in the room without being present. And I've always... He stopped. I've carried that. The time I spent managing instead of just being there. Emily said nothing. You're the first person since then who has made me want to just be there, he said. Not manage, not strategize, just show up. He paused. I wanted you to know that. Outside, the snow had gone very still. The cousins were making noise somewhere deeper in the house. Max said something in his precise voice, and one of the cousins laughed. Emily took Adrian's hand. He held it. Not dramatically, just held it. They stood at the window and watched the snow outside and didn't say anything else, because sometimes the most honest thing two people can do is acknowledge what's been said and let it settle without reaching for more. January brought the particular grayness of a new year that hasn't decided yet what kind of year it wants to be. Emily went back to school after the holiday, and her kindergartners came back too, slightly taller in the way children get over breaks, as if absence itself is a growing condition, and the classroom reestablished its rhythm within a week, which was one of the things she loved about children, their capacity to adapt to pattern, to find comfort in the known. She was in the middle of a reading group one Tuesday afternoon, 3 kids around the small kidney-shaped table, when her phone buzzed on her desk across the room. She ignored it. She was always ignoring it during reading groups, which the kids had learned to expect, which Marcus in particular had started to rely on as a window for various activities he preferred to conduct unsupervised. The phone buzzed again, and again. She excused herself, told the 3 kids to practice their page, and crossed to her desk. 3 messages from Adrian, which was unusual. Adrian was constitutionally incapable of the kind of rapid-fire texting that most people under 40 conducted as a basic mode of communication. The first said, "Something happened." The second said, "Can you call me when you're done? It's not an emergency. Max is fine." The third, 3 minutes after the second, said, "Actually, it might be. Call me." She told her aide to take over the reading group, stepped into the hallway, and called him. He answered before it rang. "There's an article," he said. His voice was the controlled version, the version she'd learned to recognize as the exterior that was keeping something from showing. "A gossip piece, online, about us." He paused. "It's not... The content is mostly speculative, but someone fed them information about your background, your income, the dress at the gala." Another pause. "Someone who was at the gala." Emily stood in the school hallway with its bulletin boards of student artwork and its smell of industrial cleaning supplies, and felt the cold specificity of the information land. "What does it say?" she said. "That I've taken up with a woman who is clearly out of her depth, and that sources close to me are concerned the relationship is..." He stopped. "It uses the phrase advantageous positioning, meaning on your part." The phrase was familiar in its architecture. It was not the same as what Vanessa had said to her PR contact, but it was adjacent. It was the same genus of accusation. "How many people were at the gala?" she said. 200, roughly." She leaned against the wall. "Adrian." "I know. It might not have been Vanessa." She said, "I know what she said." His voice was careful. "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm telling you what's happening." A pause. "Are you okay?" The question in the middle of all of it. She looked at the student artwork on the bulletin board. One of her kids had painted a house with a very large sun, the kind of sun that kindergartners always paint, taking up most of the sky, yellow, with rays going in every direction. "I'm going to be okay," she said. "What are you going to do about it?" "My communications team wants to respond. I'm not inclined to respond. Responding gives it more attention than it deserves." "I agree with that." "The problem is not responding looks like confirmation." "To who?" He was quiet for a moment. "To people who are looking for confirmation, to people who already want to believe it." "Do you care what those people think?" A pause. "About me?" "No." "About you?" "That's different." She closed her eyes briefly. Adrian, I teach kindergarten. I live in an apartment with a radiator that clicks. The people in my life who matter know who I am. The people who read this piece and believe it don't know me and aren't going to, and their opinion of me isn't actually information about me. She paused. Don't respond. Silence. Okay, he said, and I want to say something. Say it. If it was Vanessa who said something to someone else at the event, beyond what she told me, she stopped, started again. I won't pretend that's not a line. It would be a line. But I don't know if it was her. And I'm not going to decide it was her because it's convenient to have someone to blame. She opened her eyes. Can we agree to not decide yet? He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. We can agree to that. Thank you. A pause. Emily. Yeah. I need you to know that nothing in that article. I know, she said. I haven't finished. You don't have to. I want to. His voice was steady and direct. Nothing in that article changes anything for me. The way I see you, the way this is. None of it. I want to say that out loud so you have it. She stood in the hallway of her school between the student art and the industrial cleaning smell and the sound of 23 kindergartners learning to read on the other side of the wall. She thought about the lavender dress. She thought about the terrace. She thought about every small, careful thing she'd done since October to protect herself from exactly this, from being visible, from being named in the context of something that could hurt her. She thought about what it felt like to be seen anyway. Thank you, she said. She went back to her reading group. Marcus had drawn a small and extremely unauthorized addition to the corner of his worksheet. She sat down at the kidney table and did not address the drawing because picking battles was a skill she'd developed over 6 years of teaching and had never fully applied to her own life. She started working on it. The article disappeared from the internet's attention cycle in approximately 72 hours, which was about how long anything without a follow-up scandal tended to survive in that particular ecosystem. Adrian's communications team sent him daily updates for 3 days and then stopped, which meant the metrics had fallen below whatever threshold they used to define relevance, and the world had moved on to something else. Emily found that she minded it less than she'd expected to, not because it hadn't stung. It had, in the specific way that public accusations sting even when the people who matter to you know they're false, because the record exists somewhere and you can't unpublish a thing once it's been published. But she had spent enough of her life managing the gap between how she was perceived and who she actually was, that one more misperception, even a public one, felt like a variation on a familiar theme rather than something categorically new. What she did mind, quietly and without entirely acknowledging it to herself, was the question of where it had come from. She had told Adrian they wouldn't decide yet. She had meant it when she said it. But meaning something and being free of the thought were different processes, and the thought kept surfacing in the hours between other things, during the drive to school, during lunch, in the 20 minutes before sleep, when the brain makes its final unsupervised pass through the events of the day. Vanessa had spoken to a contact. The contact had refused to pass it further. The article had appeared anyway, sourced vaguely to people familiar with the relationship, which was the kind of attribution that was simultaneously impossible to verify and impossible to disprove. She did not call Vanessa. She sat with the question without giving it a resolution because she'd decided that was the honest thing to do. Not the comfortable thing, not the thing that would make her feel better or worse in a predictable direction, but the honest thing, which was to hold the uncertainty until she had actual information and not fill the gap with what she was afraid might be true. Vanessa resolved it herself on a Saturday morning in late January with a phone call that Emily answered while she was at the farmer's market with Adrian and Max, standing in front of a stand selling root vegetables in the kind of quantities that suggested the vendor had significant faith in the public's appetite for parsnips. She looked at the name on her screen and stepped away from the vegetable stand, leaving Adrian holding a turnip he'd been examining with the same serious deliberation he applied to most things. "Vanessa," she said, "it wasn't me." Vanessa's voice was different from the December call, less raw, more controlled, but with a steadiness that sounded effortful rather than natural. "The article. I need you to know it wasn't me." "Okay." "I found out who it was." A pause. Do you remember Patricia Chambers from the gala? Emily turned it over. Patricia Chambers, with the smile that didn't reach her eyes. Well, it's just a dress. I remember her. She was at the gala when everything happened. She saw Adrian ask you to dance. She's been in Vanessa's social orbit for years, which is, we've run in some of the same circles. She assumed I'd want the information used, and she ran it herself. Vanessa's voice had a particular flatness. She was wrong about what I'd want. Emily was quiet. I know how that sounds, Vanessa said. I know it sounds like I'm just saying it wasn't me because I don't want it to be me. But I called her after the article came out. She admitted it. She thought she was doing me a favor. A pause. She's not someone I'm going to be associated with anymore. Emily stood in the January cold among strangers choosing vegetables and sat with this information. She turned it over. She tested it for the quality of truth, which she'd learned over 30 years of knowing Vanessa, to assess not perfectly but reasonably well. Vanessa was capable of many things, but she was not, as a general rule, capable of lying when directly confronted. She could deflect, could contextualize, could manage the presentation of facts, but a clean, direct lie was not her instrument. Okay, Emily said. I just needed you to know. I believe you. A pause. Longer than expected. You do? Yes. Emily watched Adrian across the market, who had apparently come to a decision about the turnip and was paying for it while Max stood beside him with the focused detachment of a child who has made his peace with the fact that adults find turnips interesting. I believe you. Oh. Vanessa's voice did something complicated that Emily didn't try to categorize. Okay. Are you still going to therapy? Every week. Good. Another pause. Emily, Vanessa said, I'm working on understanding some things about myself, about us. The therapist says it's going to take a while, and I believe her. A pause. I just wanted you to know I'm doing it. I know, Emily said. I'm glad. She hung up and went back to the vegetable stand, where Adrian was now holding a turnip and looking at her with the particular quality of his attention that didn't demand anything, so just waited to receive whatever she was ready to offer. My sister, she said. Yeah? It wasn't her, the article. Someone else decided to be helpful on her behalf. She picked up a parsnip for no particular reason and set it back down. She found out and called to tell me. Adrian was quiet for a moment. That's something. She's going to therapy every week, Emily said. She told me like it was a report, like she was giving me documentation. Is that her way? Yes. She almost smiled. It's actually her being vulnerable. She just can't do it without the architecture of competence around it. He looked at her. You understand her better than she deserves. Maybe. She looked at the vegetables. Or maybe understanding someone is just what you do when you've been trying to figure them out for 30 years, and you finally have enough information to assemble something coherent. Max appeared between them, holding a small jar of honey he'd apparently negotiated for with his father's card, because he had the expression of a transaction that had gone according to plan. Did you know, he said, that honey never expires? They found edible honey in Egyptian tombs. I did know that, Emily said. He looked slightly disappointed that this information was not new to her. Oh, he said, then recovering, did you know the bees have to travel the equivalent of 3 times around the world to make 1 pound of honey? That I did not know. He looked satisfied. He tucked the honey under his arm and moved on to examine the next stand, with the purposeful efficiency of a child who has a clear research agenda. Adrian was watching her. He likes you, he said. I know. She watched Max assess a display of dried herbs with the rigor of a small scientist. I like him too. She paused. He's the most specific person I've ever met. He gets that from his mother. Adrian said it the way he sometimes said things about Catherine, without weight, without the performance of grief, just as information that was part of the true account of his life. She was the most specific person I've ever met. Everything she thought, she had thought all the way through. She never had a half-formed opinion about anything. That sounds exhausting. It was, occasionally, he said. It was also remarkable. He paused. He's going to have questions for you, about us, eventually. He'll think them through completely first, and then he'll ask them, probably when you're not expecting it. I know, Emily said. I'm ready for that. He looked at her, the direct, full attention look. Are you? She met it. As ready as I can be, which isn't the same as perfectly ready, but yes. He held the turnip. She watched him hold it. What are you going to do with that? She said. I have no idea, he said. I thought it looked useful. She took it from him and put it back on the pile. Let's get coffee, she said. They found Max and got coffee, and the three of them sat at a table outside, despite the cold, because Max wanted to watch the market, and they had found, over months of Saturdays, that accommodating Max's desire to observe things was generally more efficient than redirecting it. It was, Emily thought, looking at the two of them across the small table, Max with his honey and his observations, Adrian with his coffee and his particular quality of stillness, one of the most ordinary things she had ever been part of. She was deeply aware of how much she wanted to keep it. Spring arrived gradually and then suddenly, the way spring tends to, as if the season itself had been quietly doing prep work that you didn't notice until one morning the light was different and the air had a different texture, and something had clearly shifted in the night. By March, Emily had a drawer at Adrian's house. Not a symbolic drawer, a practical one. The second drawer in the guest bathroom, which she used when she stayed over on Friday nights, which had started happening in February when a dinner that ran late had turned into watching a film that ran later and nobody had said anything about leaving and she'd fallen asleep on the couch and woken up at midnight with a blanket over her that she hadn't put there herself. She'd asked Adrian about it the next morning, slightly embarrassed. You were asleep, he said, making coffee. You looked uncomfortable. I put a blanket on you. He glanced at her. I didn't want to wake you. You could have. You were asleep for 45 minutes before I noticed, he said. You clearly needed it. She had not known what to do with this, which was a feeling she'd gotten used to. The frequency with which Adrian did something so simply decent that it left her without a framework for response. She went home that morning and stood in her apartment and looked at the clicking radiator and thought about what it meant that she'd fallen asleep in someone else's house and slept well. The drawer came 3 weeks after that, proposed by Adrian with the same directness he applied to most things. You keep forgetting your face wash. There's a drawer. Use it. She used it. By April, Max's reading had expanded from volcanoes to geological time periods, which he explained to her on a Saturday afternoon with the systematic thoroughness of a very small professor delivering a lecture he'd been preparing for a while. The Hadean Eon lasted about 600 million years, he said. Nothing lived. The Earth was just forming. He seemed to find this philosophically interesting. It wasn't ready yet. That's a long time to not be ready, Emily said. He looked at her with the evaluating seriousness he'd directed at her the first day they met, except that now it carried a different quality. Not skepticism, exactly, more like the consideration of a person who has already made a decision but is in the habit of revisiting it periodically to confirm it still holds. Emily, he said. Yeah. Are you going to stay? She set down the paper she'd been grading. She looked at him, this 5, almost 6-year-old boy with his father's eyes and his mother's precision and his own entirely individual combination of both, sitting at the kitchen table with his geology book and his question. She had known this conversation was coming. Adrian had warned her gently in February. He'll ask eventually. He'll think it through completely first. She had told herself she was ready. She was less ready than she'd told herself. I want to, she said, because that was the most honest version of the true thing. I'm not going anywhere on purpose. She paused, and then she gave him the rest of it, because he was 5 and he had asked a direct question, and he deserved a direct answer, and she was not going to speak to him in the soft, indefinite language adults often used with children when they didn't want to be held to anything. I can't promise you forever because nobody gets to know forever. But I can tell you that I'm here and I want to keep being here, and I'm not planning to go anywhere. He considered this for approximately 15 seconds. It was a real 15 seconds. She watched him process it, actually watched the consideration move through his expression. "That's honest," he said finally. "I try to be." He looked back at his book, then, without looking up, "I'm glad you're here." She breathed. "I'm glad I'm here too." He turned a page. "Did you know that the Cambrian explosion took less than 20 million years?" "I didn't know that." "It's when everything started," he said. "Everything complicated. All at once, basically." He ran his finger along a line of text. "Scientists aren't sure why it happened when it did." "Maybe things just get to a point," Emily said, "where they're finally ready." He looked up at her with the expression of someone encountering an idea that has been independently confirmed by an outside source. "That's what I thought too," he said. She picked up her papers and went back to grading, and the afternoon continued, and the house settled around them with its familiar particular weight. The hard conversation arrived in May, on a Wednesday evening, when she had not expected it, and when she was therefore most completely undefended. She had come over for dinner. She did this twice a week now, sometimes 3 times, in the way that you build a presence in someone's life through repetition until the repetition is itself the foundation of something. And Max was already in bed, and she and Adrian were in the kitchen with the remains of the meal between them and a bottle of wine that was about 2/3 gone. She had been telling him about a parent-teacher conference that had gone sideways, a meeting she'd gone into with careful preparation and that had turned into something else entirely when a father had informed her, in a voice calibrated for maximum impact, that her teaching approach was pedagogically unsound and that he had done research. "He showed me printed articles," she said. "He had printed them out. He'd highlighted sections." "What did you do?" "I listened to him for 12 minutes, and then I said, 'I appreciate you sharing this with me. I've been teaching for 6 years, and these are the research frameworks we operate within at this school. And if you'd like to schedule a follow-up with the principal to discuss curriculum philosophy, I'm happy to do that.'" "And?" "He said he would think about it." She drank her wine. "He won't. People like that never follow through. They want the confrontation, not the resolution." "You're very composed in situations that would make me—" He stopped. "Less composed." "I've had 6 years of practice." She set down her glass. "You learn to receive things without absorbing them. You learn that someone's anger at you isn't actually information about you." He looked at her. "You've had to learn that outside the classroom too," he said. She met his eyes. "Yes. Your sister. Partly her, partly a lot of things." She was quiet for a moment. "I grew up in a house where one person's needs were very large, and I learned to make my own needs smaller. That's not a tragedy. It's just a thing that happened, and I've spent a long time unlearning the parts that don't serve me." He turned his wine glass in his hands. He had the quality he sometimes had of working towards something, of building up to a thing from its surrounding terrain. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Okay? And I want you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is something you think I won't want to hear." She looked at him steadily. "Ask." He set down the glass. He looked at her with the full attention look, the one that never felt like pressure but always felt like witness. "Do you feel like you've made yourself smaller with me, the way you did growing up?" The question landed in a specific place. She sat with it for a moment, which she knew he understood. He never rushed her pauses. "No," she said slowly. "Not smaller." She considered it more carefully because it deserved more than a reflexive answer. "There are moments when the difference between our lives it's very large, Adrian, and sometimes I feel it. The car, the house, the way you can decide something costs too much to think about and never think about it again. And that's not a criticism, it's just true. And sometimes I don't know what to do with the feeling except acknowledge that it's there." He was listening. "But smaller?" She shook her head. "No, I'm more myself with you than I've been with most people. More willing to say things out loud." She paused. "You did that. Not deliberately, I don't think. You listened like what I said mattered. And after a while I started believing that it did." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The differences are real." "Yes. I'm not going to pretend they aren't. I know. I don't want you to. But they're not—" He stopped, chose his words with the deliberateness he applied when something mattered. "They're not the architecture of us. They're the weather around us. Is that too neat a way to put it? She thought about it. Maybe slightly, she said. But directionally accurate. He almost smiled. She had catalogued his almost smiles by now, could distinguish between the amused one and the relieved one, and the one that was something else, something warmer and more unguarded that appeared rarely and never in company. This was that one. There's something I want to do, he said. Tell me. The gala is in October, the Hargrove Gala. It's every year. He looked at her. I want to go with you, not because of what happened last time. I'm not interested in a symbolic correction of last October. I want to take you to a room full of people I know and stand next to you and have that be the normal thing that it should be. She understood what he was saying and what he wasn't saying. That's not the only thing you want, she said. He looked at his hands. This was the rare thing. Adrian visibly gathering himself. It was not something he did often, and it was not something she had seen him do in public or in front of anyone else, and she understood without being told that the fact that he did it in front of her was itself significant. No, he said. It's not the only thing. The kitchen was very quiet. The house was very quiet around the kitchen. I'm not going to do anything tonight, he said. This isn't a setup for something. I just need you to know that there are things I want to say to you, and I'm working up to them, and I didn't want you to not know that while I was working up to them. She looked at him for a long time, at the careful man who had come to find her on a terrace at a charity gala and stood beside her at a railing and said, "Sometimes it matters to have a witness," who had held out his hand in a ballroom without making it a performance, who sat outside his son's door at midnight and made overcooked pasta and held her hand at a window in December and never once asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They finished the wine. She drove home in her own car through the May night with the windows down and the warm air moving through the car, and she thought about what he'd said and what he hadn't said, and the distance between those two things, which was closing. June arrived, and with it the last weeks of the school year, which were always complicated. The ramp-up of everything, assessments and portfolios and the small ceremonies that kindergarten requires, the collection of 23 children who had arrived in September not knowing how to read and were now departing having learned something fundamental about language and about themselves. Emily always found the last week of school emotionally strange. She was not someone who cried easily, but the last day had a way of sneaking up on her regardless, something about watching 5-year-olds walk out carrying their portfolios with a dignity that was genuinely moving. Max's birthday came in February, and she had been there for it. A small party, 4 of his school friends, and the serious cake deliberations he'd conducted with his father beforehand, which had apparently involved a spreadsheet. She had given him a set of books about deep-sea creatures, which he had received with the focused pleasure of someone whose gifts usually missed. He'd read the first one before his friends had finished leaving. She had been thinking, since the May conversation, about what it meant to be waiting for something you knew was coming. It was not an unpleasant feeling. It was actually, she found, a feeling she was capable of sitting with, the anticipation of something good that was coming in its own time, which was so different from the anticipation of something bad that she kept noticing the difference. She had spent a lot of her life braced for impact. This was something else. She was at school in the second-to-last week of June, eating her lunch at her desk and looking at the class portfolio she was putting together for each student, a record of the year's progress, where they'd started and where they were finishing, when her door opened without a knock. It was Vanessa. Emily stared at her. "How did you get past the front office?" "I told them I was your sister and that it was a family emergency." Vanessa looked around the classroom with an expression Emily couldn't immediately read. "It's not a family emergency. I'm sorry about that. I needed to talk to you and I knew you'd be at lunch." Emily looked at her sister. The months since December had wrought something in Vanessa's appearance that was hard to name specifically. She was still put together, still careful about how she presented herself, but there was something different in the way she carried it, less armored, less like the presentation was doing all the work. "Sit down," Emily said, gesturing at the small chairs arranged around the low tables in her room. It was slightly absurd, Vanessa in her good work clothes in a kindergarten chair, and Vanessa seemed to understand this and sit in it anyway. "I'm leaving," Vanessa said. I took a position in London, international division. I've been offered it before, but twice before. And I always said no because she stopped. I said no because I was afraid to go somewhere where I didn't have the network I'd built here, where I'd have to start over. She looked at her hands. My therapist says that the network was also a way of measuring myself, constantly, against other people, against what I thought I should have. Emily said nothing. London is a chance to stop measuring, Vanessa said, or at least to try. I can't guarantee it, but I think being somewhere where nobody knows me and I don't know anybody is actually, I think I need that. She looked up. I'm not running away. I want you to know that. I've been talking about this for 3 months, and my therapist agrees it's the right move for the right reasons. Emily sat at her desk and looked at her sister and felt the complicated layering of things she had always felt when she thought about Vanessa. The damage and the love and the years of both and the way they couldn't be separated. When? She said. 3 weeks. Emily absorbed this. Okay. Are you... Vanessa started. Is this... I'm not going to tell you not to go, Emily said. If this is what you need, you should do it. She paused. I want us to be okay eventually. I've always wanted that, but I think you're right that you need... Something has to shift. Vanessa looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes were steady in the way of someone who has been practicing steadiness. Can I say something? Yes. I have hated you, Vanessa said. It landed clean and precise without drama. Not all the time, not even most of the time, but in certain moments, when I was at my worst, yes, I have felt actual hatred toward you, and I want to say that out loud because I think you knew it, and I think you've been carrying the knowledge of it, and I think it deserves to be said out loud, instead of both of us just knowing it without it ever being named. The classroom was very quiet. I know, Emily said. I know you know. Vanessa's voice didn't waver. And I'm telling you that I'm ashamed of it. Not in the way where I'm asking for your absolution. In the way where I'm telling you I understand the damage it caused, and I'm not minimizing it. She paused. You deserved a sister who was proud of you. You have always, in every room, in every version of your life, been someone worth being proud of. And I spent 20 years not being able to feel that without it costing me something. She took a breath. I'm sorry, Emily. I'm genuinely sorry. Emily sat with this for a long time. She could hear, distantly, the sounds of the school, voices in the hallway, a bell somewhere, the everyday institutional life of a building full of children learning things. She thought about what it meant to be apologized to by someone who meant it. She had been apologized to before, in various forms, by Vanessa. The tactical apologies. The apologies that were actually arguments in apology clothing. This was different. She could feel the difference, and she trusted her ability to feel it. Okay, she said. Okay? I hear you, Emily said. I accept it. She paused. And I want you to know, I have never stopped being your sister, through all of it. I have been hurt, and I have been angry, and I have needed distance, but I have never stopped wanting you to be okay. She looked at Vanessa. I want you to be okay in London. I want whatever it is you're going to work through to actually work. And I want, when you're ready to come back, whenever that is, I want us to try again. Vanessa pressed her lips together, her composure held but barely. I'll call you, she said, when I'm settled. I'll answer, Emily said. Vanessa stood from the small kindergarten chair with the particular dignity of someone rising from a ridiculous position while refusing to let it be ridiculous. She smoothed her clothes. She looked around the classroom one more time, at the alphabet cards and the student artwork and the small chairs and the evidence everywhere of Emily's actual life and the actual work she did in it. This is a good classroom, she said. Thank you. I mean it. It looks like a place where someone actually cares. Emily looked at it with her. I do, she said. Vanessa nodded. Then she walked out through the kindergarten door, and Emily listened to her footsteps in the hallway until they were gone. She sat at her desk for a while after that, alone in her classroom in the middle of a Tuesday lunch break, with her student portfolios and her unfinished sandwich and the quiet that comes after something significant that doesn't know yet whether it's an ending or a beginning. She thought both, probably. Most significant things were. She went back to the portfolios. There were 23 of them, one for each kid, and each one told a real story, a record of a year, of what was hard and what came through anyway. She had spent the morning writing the narrative notes for each one. She was almost done. She picked up her pen and kept going. The summer that followed was the best Emily could remember in years, and she would not have been able to say precisely why, which might have been the point. It was not eventful in the ways that tend to make summers memorable. No travel to remarkable places, no dramatic milestones. It was ordinary in the specific way that is only visible when you've spent enough time in the wrong kind of ordinary to know the difference. She spent most of her Fridays through Sundays at the house. She and Max established a Saturday routine that had developed entirely without discussion. She arrived by 10, they went somewhere, the library, the Natural History Museum, a farmer's market, once a hardware store because Max had decided he needed to understand how plumbing worked and had spent 45 minutes asking a patient employee escalating questions about pipe systems, and then came back and did their respective work, while Adrian did his in his office and the house held them all in its familiar, settled way. She met Adrian's business partner, a man named James, who was sharp and funny and who had known Adrian since before Catherine, and who looked at Emily with the particular evaluation of someone who had watched his friend survive something terrible and was cautious about who he let close to what remained. He didn't say any of this. He didn't have to. She could read it in the first handshake. They had dinner, the four of them, at a restaurant she'd never have taken herself to. The kind of restaurant that didn't put prices on the menu, which she had heard about as a concept but never actually encountered, and the first time she opened the menu, she had to work to keep her expression neutral. She'd managed it. "How's the teaching?" James had asked, and it was a real question. He leaned forward slightly. He waited for the full answer. She told him about Marcus and the unauthorized drawing and the reading group and the parent who'd brought printed articles. He'd laughed at the printed articles. "You're not what I expected," he said at the end of the evening. Not unkindly. "What did you expect?" He glanced at Adrian. Someone more impressed with herself for being in this situation. She looked at him steadily. "There's nothing to be impressed about," she said. "Adrian is in a situation I'm in. He's a person I know." James looked at her for a moment, then he looked at Adrian. Something passed between them. The shorthand of people who have been friends long enough to have it. "Good," James said simply. Walking to the car afterward, Adrian said, "That was exactly the right thing to say." "I wasn't trying to say the right thing." "I know," he said. "That's why it was." The summer continued its ordinary, extraordinary progress. Emily painted one wall of her classroom in July, a project she did every other summer, a new color, a fresh start for September. Adrian came and helped, which had not been the plan, but he'd appeared on a Saturday morning with coffee and the information that Mrs. Huang had Max, and he had nothing he couldn't move. He was not a good painter. He was methodical and precise, and he held the roller at the wrong angle and had to be corrected twice, and the third time he overcorrected. "You're a billionaire," she said, looking at the irregular patch on the middle section of the wall. "You could have someone do this? You didn't ask someone. You were doing it yourself." "That's different. This is my classroom. You asked me to come." "I didn't ask you to come. You showed up." "You didn't tell me to go," he said. This was delivered with complete seriousness, which was how he delivered most things. She looked at him. He was wearing paint-spattered jeans and holding a roller, and there was a small streak of yellow on his forearm he hadn't noticed, and he looked... She thought about this later, in the way you think about moments you want to keep accurate. He looked genuinely happy. Not performing happiness, not at ease in the social sense, genuinely, specifically happy to be in this particular place with this particular person, doing something as unimpressive as painting a classroom wall. "No," she agreed. "I didn't tell you to go." She handed him a fresh roller tray. He got better at the angle by the end of the afternoon. Not good, but better. The wall was uneven in 2 spots. She left them. She thought, looking at those spots every day when she came in to set up for September, that they were the most honest parts of the room. September came back around the way it always does. with that particular quality of beginning that belongs exclusively to the ninth month. The way the air changes and the light angles differently, and everything that felt suspended over summer suddenly has direction again. Emily's classroom smelled like fresh paint on one wall and the familiar everything else on the others. And her new class of 23 kindergartners arrived on the first day with the wide-eyed, careful energy of children who have been told that school is important and are not yet sure what that means. She stood at the door and greeted each one by name, because she had spent the week before school memorizing their files. Not just the names, but the details, the things that made each child specific. She had been doing this for 7 years, and it never felt like a task. It felt like the most basic form of respect she knew how to offer, to know someone's name before they had to give it to you. A year had passed since the gala. She was aware of this in the way you become aware of anniversaries, not because you mark them, but because the body remembers the season, the quality of October light, the specific temperature of air that carries the smell of dead leaves and cold coming. She was different than she'd been a year ago. She knew this not from a dramatic sense of transformation. She distrusted dramatic transformation, had seen enough of it performed in people who hadn't actually changed to know that the real thing was quieter, but from the small accumulated evidence of daily life. She took up more space in conversations. She said things out loud that a year ago she would have kept internal. She had stopped, almost entirely, making herself small as a preemptive defense against being a target. She had not solved herself. She still drove herself slightly crazy with the particular combination of patience for others and impatience with herself that had been her operating system for 31 years. She still sometimes woke at 2 a.m. with the low-grade anxiety that was its own kind of weather, familiar and unwelcome and mostly manageable. She was still not always sure, in social situations that involved Adrian's world, the board dinners, the industry events, the rooms full of people who had known him for years and were calibrating her with the specific interest of people who care about someone and are unsure about the new variable in his life. But she was not afraid of those rooms anymore. She was in them as herself, which was sometimes uncomfortable and was always more sustainable than the alternative. Max was 6. He had grown 3 inches over the summer in the way that children that age sometimes do, as if the body decided to make up for lost time all at once. And he was now tall enough that the top of his head came level with Emily's shoulder when he stood beside her, which he did with increasing frequency. Not clinging, nothing so demonstrative as clinging, but a proximity that had developed over months into its own language. He had read his way through deep-sea creatures, geological time periods, and was now in a sustained engagement with the physics of flight that had led to the construction of 17 paper airplane prototypes, each one representing a specific hypothesis, each one carefully labeled in his precise handwriting with its test conditions and results. He had started calling her M, not Emily. M. It had happened one afternoon in August, unremarked, as if the abbreviation had always been available, and he had simply decided the time was right to use it. She had not commented on it, neither had Adrian. It existed in the space between them as a fact that didn't require discussion, one of the many small things that had accumulated over a year into something that felt, increasingly, like the structure of a shared life. The gala was in 3 weeks. The Hargrove Foundation Annual Charity Gala. October 14th. 1 year since a woman in her mother's 1987 lavender dress had stood on a terrace and been told, without those exact words, that she did not belong. Adrian had mentioned it in August, casually, in the way he mentioned things he'd already decided about. "I'll have Gerald pick you up at 7. "You're not picking me up yourself?" "I'll be at the venue early. Board obligations." He paused. "Unless you want to wait and come with me." "No, 7 is fine." She had looked at him. "Adrian." "Yeah." "What are you planning?" He met her eyes, the full attention look. "Nothing you need to worry about yet," he said, which meant something. She knew him well enough by now to know that nothing you need to worry about yet from Adrian Sterling was not nothing. She spent the following 3 weeks not worrying about it in the specific way where you are absolutely thinking about it. What? The dress she bought for the gala cost more than she was comfortable spending, and she spent it anyway, because she had decided, sitting in her classroom in late September, surrounded by alphabet cards and construction paper and the daily evidence of work she believed in, that she was allowed to want to look like herself in a room that had once made her feel like she didn't belong, not like someone else's version of her, like herself, on a night that mattered, in something she had chosen. It was deep burgundy, floor length, simple enough that it required confidence to carry, which her mother told her when she came to see it, standing in Emily's apartment with her hands pressed together and an expression that Emily recognized as the specific form of maternal pride that her mother deployed when she was trying not to cry. "You look like yourself," her mother said. "That's exactly what I was going for." Her mother reached out and touched her face briefly, the way she had done since Emily was small, the gesture that meant too many things to name. "Your father would have—" She stopped, started again. "He would have liked him, Adrian. He would have appreciated the way he looks at you." "How does he look at me?" Her mother smiled. "Like you're the most interesting thing in the room," she said. "Always. Even when he's talking to someone else." Emily stood in front of her mirror in the burgundy dress and her own shoes and thought about a year of Saturdays, a year of becoming legible to someone in the full sense, not just the presentable version of herself, not the carefully edited version, but the whole complicated, inconvenient actual version, and the specific strange grace of being known that way and not found wanting. She thought about the lavender dress, folded in a paper bag in the back of her closet, which she had not thrown away. She had thought about it sometimes and not known exactly why she was keeping it, and now, standing in the mirror, she thought she might finally understand. It was evidence, not of what had been done to her, but of the distance traveled since. You needed evidence of the before to understand the after. Gerald picked her up at 7. The Whitmore Grand Hotel was exactly as it had been a year ago. The chandeliers, the marble floors, the string quartet, the particular gold light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But the experience of arriving inside it was different, the way the same room can feel entirely different depending on who you are when you walk into it. She walked in as herself. Adrian found her within 4 minutes of her arrival, which she would later learn was because he'd been watching for her. He came through the crowd with the directness he applied to everything, and when he reached her, he stopped and looked at her for a moment, the specific look that her mother had apparently noticed from across rooms. "Hi," he said. "Hi. You look—" He stopped. He was not a man who reached for adjectives. "You look right," he said, which was, she thought, the best possible thing he could have said. "You look like you've been here for 2 hours, she said. He had. He looked slightly tired around the eyes in the way that board obligations produced. 2.5, he said. "I've been saving my actual attention for you. That's either very sweet or slightly alarming. Probably both." He offered his arm. "Come on. There are people I want you to meet who are actually interesting." She took his arm, and they walked into the room together, and nobody looked at her dress with the dismissive flicker of someone cataloging a deficiency. People looked because she was with Adrian Sterling, which was its own category of looking, and because she was wearing a dress the color of wine and carrying herself like someone who knew why she was there. She was there because she belonged there, not because she'd earned it in the way Vanessa had spent 10 years trying to earn it, not because of whose arm she was on, but because she was a person who had walked into a room and that was enough. That had always been enough. She just hadn't believed it a year ago. They moved through the room, and she met the people he'd meant. A foundation director who ran the literacy programs and who had spent 15 years building something Emily had seen the results of in her own classroom, and the kids who arrived in September and left in June. They talked for 20 minutes, and the woman looked at her with the particular attention of someone who has met a lot of people who claim to care about children's education and is good at distinguishing the ones who actually do. "We should have coffee sometime," the woman said at the end. "Off the gala circuit. I'm interested in what you're seeing in the classroom." Emily said yes, and meant it, and took her card. They ate dinner at a long table where Emily was seated next to James, who had apparently requested this, and who told her over the first course that Adrian had been different since October. "Different how?" she asked. James considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "More present," he said. "That's the most accurate word. He was always functional, high-functioning. After Catherine, he was the most functional grieving person I've ever seen, which was both impressive and slightly frightening, And then this year he shook his head. He laughs at things now, real laughs, not the polite ones. She thought about the laugh she'd heard in her apartment kitchen the night the pasta was overcooked. The ungainly, entirely sincere laugh. He told me once, she said, that his instinct can be another word for what he wants to believe. He said it as a criticism of himself. James looked at her. That's extremely self-aware. I know, it surprised me too. She paused. But I think he's also learned when to trust it. James was quiet for a moment. You know, he said, a year ago, if someone had described you to me, kindergarten teacher, met at the gala, completely outside the world he moves in, I would have been skeptical. And now? Now I think the fact that you're completely outside that world might be exactly why it works. He picked up his fork. He spent 10 years surrounded by people who want something from him. You want him. That's a significant distinction, she said. Yes, he said. It is. The program began after dinner, and Emily sat in the third row with Adrian beside her and watched the Foundation's work presented through testimonials and numbers, real numbers, the kind that represented children who had learned to read and what that meant for the trajectory of a life. She felt sitting there, the particular alignment of things that don't often align, the work she actually did every day, and the larger architecture of why it mattered. She was thinking about this, about Marcus and the reading group and the small click that happened behind a child's eyes when language finally made sense, when Adrian leaned toward her slightly and said, very quietly, "There's something I need to do in a few minutes." She looked at him. "I told you I had things I wanted to say," he said. "I'm going to say them." "Adrian," she kept her voice low, "what are you planning?" "Something I've thought about very carefully," he said, "and that I'm going to do anyway, despite being aware that it's terrifying." She looked at his face. He was not performing calm. He was actually calm in the way of someone who has made a decision and is on the other side of the deliberation. The decision was made. The calm was real. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "I trust you," she said. It came out simply, which was the only way it could have come out, because it was simply true. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face that she would have been hard-pressed to name, but that she felt, sitting a foot away from him in the third row of the Whitmore Grand Ballroom, as clearly as she had ever felt anything. Then he straightened, and the program continued, and she sat beside him and waited. The Foundation's executive director concluded her remarks and opened the floor for what she called a word from one of our longest-standing board members. Adrian stood. He walked to the microphone with the ease of a man who had spoken in front of crowds for years, and the room settled into the particular attentive quiet that his presence tended to produce. "I've been coming to this gala for 5 years," he said, "and for 4 of those years I wrote a check and made a speech, and went home and didn't think very much about why I was here. Not because the work isn't important, it is, but because I was going through the motions of obligation rather than the actual intention behind it." He paused. "A year ago, something happened in this room that changed that." Emily went very still. "A year ago, in this room, I watched a woman be publicly diminished by someone who was supposed to care for her, and instead of crumbling, instead of doing the thing that would have been understandable and human and forgivable, she lifted her chin and refused to be destroyed by it." He looked out at the room. "I didn't know her. I'd never met her. But I watched that happen, and I thought, that is a person I want to know." The room was absolutely quiet. "Her name is Emily Carter. She teaches kindergarten. She has been doing it for 7 years, in a classroom where she knows every child's name before they walk through the door, because she believes that being known by name is the most basic form of respect. She has taught children whose parents can't afford the books she uses in class. And she buys those books herself, which I didn't find out from her. I found out from a colleague of hers who mentioned it in passing as if it were simply a fact about her, which I suppose it is." He stopped. "She is the most genuinely good person I have met in my adult life. Not good in the sense of uncomplicated. Good in the sense of having thought carefully about what she believes and living in accordance with it even when it costs her." Emily was not going to cry. She had decided this preemptively, and she was maintaining the decision with the focused effort of someone who knows their own tendencies and is actively working against them. She was not entirely winning. "I have a son named Max," Adrian said. "He is 6 years old, and he reads nonfiction, and he has very specific opinions about engineering, and he asked his father last year whether it was okay to like someone new." He paused. He asked because he is a thoughtful person who takes things seriously, which he inherited from a mother who is not here, and which I hope to have helped sustain. Another pause. He shares his library books with Emily. This is, for those of you who don't know Max, approximately equivalent to giving someone your most valuable possession. A small laugh from the room. It was warm. "I'm not a person who tends to say things before I've thought about them completely," Adrian said. "I'm also not a person who says things in public for effect. But there are moments when the right action is also the visible one, and I've decided that this is one of those moments." He looked directly at Emily, across the room. "Emily." She looked back at him. He stepped away from the microphone and walked off the low stage, and the room watched him walk toward the third row, and Emily watched him come, and she was breathing very carefully because the breathing was taking concentration. He stopped in front of her. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He crouched down, not theatrically, just in the way a person gets to eye level with someone they want to see clearly. In his hand was a ring, not enormous, not performative, a ring that looked like it had been chosen with the same specificity he applied to everything, a deep-set stone that caught the chandelier light and did not need to shout. "I want to build something with you," he said. He said it quietly enough that it was almost private, almost just theirs, even in a room full of people. Not a picture of something, an actual thing, imperfect and ongoing in hours. He looked at her. "I love you. I've been working up to saying that for a while. I want you to have it on the record." Her vision was not entirely clear. She was not going to acknowledge that. "I love you too," she said. "That's also on the record." "Will you marry me?" She looked at him. At the man who had followed her to a terrace because he'd seen someone be unkind to her and had wanted her to have a witness, who sat on his son's bedroom floor at midnight to play a video of a woman singing badly, who held her hand at a window in December and let the silence be what it was, who got paint on his arm in her classroom and got better at the angle by the end of the afternoon, who was crouching in front of her in the Whitmore Grand Ballroom with a ring and the specific composed terror of a person who has made themselves genuinely vulnerable for perhaps the first time in a long time and is waiting to find out if it lands. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. Of course it fit. He had thought it through completely. She would find out later. Had enlisted Claire, who had enlisted a jeweler who had managed a sizing through means that remained, to Emily, somewhat opaque. He stood up. She stood with him. He put his arms around her and held on, in the way you hold on to something you've been afraid of losing before you'd even finished finding it. The room applauded. She barely heard it. They were married the following April, on a Saturday, in the garden of the house where they had spent 2 years building the ordinary structure of a shared life. Not the Whitmore Grand, not a venue with chandeliers. The garden, which was not perfectly manicured and had a section near the back wall where something had died over the winter and hadn't been replaced yet, and which on the day of the wedding had a tent that leaked slightly in one corner because the weather didn't cooperate completely, which everyone who mattered would later agree had made it better. 40 people. The ones who were actual to them, Claire and David and their kids, James and his wife, Emily's mother, colleagues from school, the foundation director with whom Emily had been having quarterly coffee for 6 months, and who had become something between a mentor and a friend. Max was the best man. He took this designation with the seriousness he applied to all formal responsibilities, which meant he had asked Emily 3 weeks before the wedding what his duties were and had then made a list and had checked each item off with the systematic completion of a person who does not do things halfway. He had given a speech. It was short and precise, and it contained exactly one joke, which he had workshopped with Emily over 2 afternoons and delivered with the timing of someone who had practiced it sufficiently. "My dad smiles more," he said. That's all I wanted to say. "He smiles more, and our house is louder, and last week Em burned the garlic bread and my dad said it was fine and ate it anyway, which I think is love." He looked at the small audience with his evaluating eyes. I read about love in a book once, and it was more complicated than that, but I think the garlic bread is the important part. The audience laughed. Emily cried, which she had promised herself she wouldn't do before the ceremony even started, which was a promise she had known when she made it that she was not going to keep. Adrian put his hand over hers during the vows and held it with the same steadiness he'd held it at the window on Christmas Day, the steadiness of a man who holds things as if he means to keep them. The vows were not elaborate. They had written them together on a Sunday afternoon in February, sitting at the kitchen table with Max doing his reading nearby, and the comfortable ambient noise of the house around them. They had both, independently, written something that was more honest than poetic, and when they'd compared, they'd found that the overlap was significant, and they'd built the final version from the overlap. She promised to tell him the truth even when it was inconvenient. She promised to not make herself smaller than she was to avoid being a target. She promised to keep showing up, specifically and deliberately, even on the days when showing up was the last thing she wanted to do. He promised to listen before fixing. He promised to say things out loud rather than managing them internally until they calcified into something unnavigable. He promised to let her see him be afraid sometimes, instead of only letting her see the composed version that had gotten so practiced over years of needing to be the composed version. Neither set of promises was something either of them was confident they would keep perfectly. That was, they had agreed, the point. You promised the things you were going to have to work at. Otherwise, it was just a description of yourself. Emily's mother cried from the second row with the unrestricted fullness of a woman who had worried, for years, about the daughter who made herself small, and who was now watching that daughter stand in a garden on a Saturday in April and take up exactly the space she deserved. 2 years after the wedding, in the September when Max started 3rd grade and Emily started her 9th year of teaching and the baby was 7 months old and sleeping in a pattern that could generously be called inconsistent, Vanessa came home. She called first, 2 weeks before her flight. Emily was in the kitchen doing the particular negotiation of tasks that constitutes the middle of a work night when there is an infant. The bottle that needed washing, the monitor on the counter, the stack of papers she was going to grade in theory and in practice would probably not get to before tomorrow. I'm coming back, Vanessa said, in 2 weeks. I got a position here. Same company, but they want me back to head the domestic division. A pause. I wasn't sure if I should tell you or just show up. Tell me, Emily said. Always tell me. Okay. A pause. How's the baby? Emily looked at the monitor, where the small, grainy night vision image showed a baby sleeping with her arms thrown up, the way infants do, as if in constant surrender to something. She's sleeping wrong again, she said. She does this thing where she gets her schedule backwards for about a week and then corrects. We're in the middle of a correction cycle. Does it... Vanessa stopped. Does it help? Having her? Emily thought about the question. She thought about what the last 7 months had actually been. The exhaustion that was its own category of thing, different from any tired she had felt before. The kind of tired that recalibrated your baseline. The 3 a.m. feedings and the particular helplessness of not being able to explain to a small person why the world was the way it was. The specific terror of loving something that small and that new and that unable to protect itself. And then the other thing, which was harder to name but more real, the way the baby had arrived in their house and rearranged the furniture of everything, not just the literal furniture, but the furniture of what they were to each other. The way Adrian looked holding her, with the specific competence of someone who had done this before and the specific wonder of someone who was doing it again and still couldn't entirely believe it. The way Max had looked at her the first time, standing beside Emily in the hospital room with an expression she had never seen on his face before. An expression that was not quite skepticism, and not quite wonder, but something in the territory between them, the expression of a person encountering something that reorganizes the categories. He had asked, very seriously, whether he could hold her. Emily had helped him position his arms. He had held his sister for 3 minutes with the absolute careful stillness of someone who understands the weight of what they're carrying. It helps, Emily said, and it's also the hardest thing. Both are very true at the same time. I'm glad, Vanessa said. I'm glad it helps. She paused. Emily, I want to. I've been in therapy for 2 years, and the work is real. It's not a performance. I want you to know that. I know that, Emily said. You can't know that yet. You haven't seen me. No, Emily said. But I know your voice. I've known your voice for 30 years. And this is not the voice of someone performing work. This is the voice of someone doing it. She paused. I'm not saying it's done. I'm not saying there's not more. I'm just saying I can hear the difference. A silence. The kind that Vanessa used to fill with something defensive and now left alone. Can I come see her? Vanessa said. When I'm back. Can I come meet her? Yes, Emily said. Come for dinner. Come Sunday. Okay, Vanessa said. Sunday. She came on Sunday, and she was different in the ways Emily had heard in her voice. Not transformed, not arrived at some clean final version of herself, but different in the way of someone who has been doing sustained honest work and has the marks of it. She sat on the couch and held the baby with the careful inexperience of someone who doesn't spend time around infants, and the baby looked up at her with the unfocused philosophical calm of a 7-month-old encountering a new face and finding it provisionally acceptable. Max came in from the kitchen where he'd been finishing his homework, and he looked at Vanessa with the evaluating look he gave to new situations. You're Emily's sister, he said. Yes, Vanessa said. He considered her. Are you the one from the dress story? Emily from across the room closed her eyes briefly. Max, Adrian said from the doorway. What? Em told me about it. She said it was a mean thing that happened and that things are different now. I'm asking if this is the same person. He looked at Vanessa with the directness of a child who has not yet learned that some questions are social violations. Are you? Vanessa looked at him. Something crossed her face. Not quite pain, more like the recognition of something she had earned. Yes, she said. I am. I did something unkind, and your mom... She stopped, corrected. Emily. Emily was She was better about it than I deserved. She paused. I'm trying to be better. Max considered this for approximately 10 seconds. Okay, he said. He went back to the kitchen. Vanessa looked at Emily with an expression she couldn't entirely hold together. He accepts things very quickly once they're explained honestly, Emily said. He doesn't actually like ambiguity. I noticed, Vanessa said. She looked down at the baby, who was making a small sound that might have been contentment or might have been the preliminary stages of something else. She's beautiful. She looks like Adrian, Emily said, which I think is unfair given who did the actual work. She has your mouth, Vanessa said. Emily looked at her daughter from across the room. Does she? Yes. Vanessa looked up. She really does. They had dinner, the 5 of them, at the kitchen table with the baby in her chair, and the food that was good but not perfect, and the conversation that moved through easy things and some harder ones, and back to easier ones again, the way family dinners do when the people in them are still learning how to be in the same room after a long time apart. There was one moment near the end when Vanessa said something that made Emily laugh, genuinely laugh, the real one, the involuntary one. And across the table she saw Adrian watching her with the expression her mother had described, the one that appeared regardless of who else was in the room. And she thought about the years she had spent being invisible, about the lavender dress and the terrace and the cold railing, about what it had felt like to stand in a room and believe that belonging was something that had to be earned through the right appearance, in the right clothes, at the right event, among the right people. She had been wrong about that. She understood now in a way that was not theoretical but structural, built from 2 years of daily evidence, that belonging had nothing to do with the room and everything to do with the people in it. Specifically, the people who saw you accurately and stayed anyway, who witnessed you on your bad days and your inadequate days and your days when you burned the garlic bread and had to be told it was fine, and who were still there the next day, not despite all of that, but in full knowledge of it. That was the thing she had learned. Not from being chosen in a ballroom, not from a ring in front of 200 people, but from the accumulated weight of ordinary days, from paint on a wall in 2 uneven spots, from a child handing over a library book about volcanoes, from a man who sat outside his son's door at midnight and told her about it the next day because he wanted her to have the full picture. Love, she had come to believe, was not the dramatic gesture. The dramatic gesture was just the moment when love became visible to witnesses. The actual thing was quieter and more demanding and more worth it. It was the commitment to keep showing up to the specific person in front of you, not the idealized version, not the version that would be easiest, but the real one, with all their imperfect history and ongoing contradictions, and to let yourself be that person in return. She had spent 30 years making herself small to survive the world as she'd found it. She had spent 2 years learning, slowly and imperfectly, to take up the space she'd always been entitled to. She was not finished learning. She suspected she never would be entirely finished. Max was right that some things didn't have a definitive ending. The geological record made clear that everything was always still in process, that the apparent stability of any surface was just a very slow movement, and that the Cambrian explosion of any new beginning happened in its own time, when the conditions were finally right. She looked around the kitchen table, at Max, who was explaining something to Vanessa with the focused precision of a small professor who had found a new audience, at Vanessa, who was listening with an attention that was trying very hard and mostly succeeding, at the baby in her chair, 7 months old and looking at the overhead light, with the philosophical calm of someone who has not yet formed an opinion about overhead lights, but is keeping an open mind. At Adrian, who was watching her watch all of this, with the expression that had been described to her and that she now knew from the inside, the expression that said, quietly and without performance, this is the thing. She met his eyes. He reached across the corner of the table and put his hand over hers. Just that. Just his hand on hers, in the way that had started at a window on Christmas Day and had continued through every ordinary Tuesday and difficult Wednesday and Good Saturday since. She turned her hand over and held it. Outside, the September night was doing what September nights do. Getting cooler, getting darker a little earlier, the year turning its page toward autumn with the particular purposefulness of something that knows where it's going. Inside, the kitchen was warm and imperfect, and loud in the specific way of a table full of people who are figuring out how to be a family, which is always louder and messier and more worth it than it looks from the outside. The woman who had once stood in the wrong dress in the wrong room, convinced that belonging was something that happened to other people, sat at her own table in her own life and felt, in the clearest and most uncomplicated way she had ever felt anything, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because she had arrived somewhere perfect, because she had built something real, and real, she had learned, was always worth more. End.